Good morning, Congress. Can I call Congress to order, please? Thank you, Congress. We've not had any music this morning, and I've heard that's because that the musicians are afraid that they're in danger of being upstaged by our Assistant General Secretary, Paul Novak, whose turn last night on the guitar and in the vocal region was fantastic. So, you know, I think... And to get down to the business of Congress, may I remind delegation leaders that the ballot for Section C of the General Council takes place this morning. Unions eligible to vote for Section C should collect their ballot papers from the TUC information stand situated on the lower ground floor. Ballot papers will only be provided in exchange for the official delegate form. Please note that the ballot closes at 12 noon today. I'd also like to remind you that Will There Be Justice for Colombia Fringe meeting takes place this lunchtime, and that Uber Ballesteros will be addressing Congress on Wednesday. Delegates, we start with Section 1 of the General Council report, the economy, the section on transport from page 51. I call paragraphs 1.6, 4.9 and motion 11, a safe, secure, accessible, publicly owned railway. It's going to be moved by the RMT, seconded by the TSSA, and seconded by the TSSA, and Unite have indicated that they want to speak. Can all the speakers come down to the front? So when you're ready, when you see your motion coming up, can you make sure you get down to the front and you get your card scanned? Thank you so much.
Just get your card scanned there, Sean.
I've been given a T-shirt. I don't wear T-shirts, but I will hold it up.
Plenty more over there. Okay. Morning, comrades. Morning. Sean Hoyle, RMT, moving motion 11. To begin with, I'd like to pay a special tribute to our guard conductors and drivers, our members who have been taking action now, some of them for over 18 months, longer than the famous miners' strike of '84. Real heroes fighting for a safe, accessible railway. And why are they doing it? Why are they doing it? I'll tell you now. We've been working closely with groups like DPAC, with the National Pensioners Convention and other groups who are passionate about retaining that second safety critical person on the train. They're looking at a situation where people with disabilities will have to book 48 hours in advance before they are allowed to travel. Where does it say that in the Equality Act? Where does it say that people with disabilities are allowed to be treated less favourable by people without disabilities? This is a disgrace. The RMT will not give up this fight. 2 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Peter Wilkinson was invited to a meeting by Tory MB Gavin Barwell even. Gary Barwell. A bit more credibility if it had been Gary Barwell. And our mate Gavin in Croydon, this meeting, Peter was proud to boast how it was a 3-year plan to crush the rail unions, all of them. And he bragged how there's going to be a punch-up. And he bragged how guards, drivers, etc., if they've got credit cards, if they've got mortgages, if they've got hire purchases for cars, then the laugh was going to be with him because he was going to kick us out of his industry and we were going to be on the breadline. That's 2 years down the road of a 3-year plan. I've got a message to Peter. You need to re-evaluate your 3-year plan because we ain't going nowhere. And the RMT and the other unions that are fighting this send a strong message to Peter and his like. You may think you've got a 3-year plan. You and your type won't even be around. We're going to have a Jeremy Corbyn socialist-led Labour Party government, and on day one, they will be looking to re-nationalise the railways. We will have a guard on every train, and we will have a safe railway for all to travel on. I'll tell you a couple of little stories. We've just been in contact with a young lady by the name of Ellie Ward. She was travelling on Merseyrail the other day. Now, Merseyrail, I'll remind you, a wholly Labour-run council, but they've decided to order trains where there is no guard. That's what their plan is. Steve Rotherham, the Metro Mayor, was looking for support not so long ago. I must admit, in Liverpool, a brown paper bag would win with Labour written on it anyway, so maybe they knew they didn't really need that much support. But Ellie was travelling. She'd had a few drinks, 9:30 at night, got on the train, on the phone to her boyfriend, when the guard approached her, suggested she came and sat near him because he noticed a strange man behind her and looking at her. Then that same man approached another woman and the guard again intervened. And both women were kept safe. Ellie realised when she left the train that she could have been at risk. She immediately contacted 38 Degrees, and within days we're up to 15,000 signatures about keeping the guard on the train. I mean, did you know there's been a doubling of sexual attacks on trains in the last 5 years? Doubling. So why would we even contemplate taking away the second safety critical person? You wouldn't. You just would not do that. But it's okay, because we've got lots of departments out there doing reports. But unfortunately, he who pays the piper plays the piper. We've got the rail delivery group, the boss's rail delivery group. And they commissioned a report a little while ago. But when the conclusion was that for people with disabilities, older people need a guard on the train, it's funny how that report hasn't actually come out. It's being suppressed. And we have to highlight what's going on. I don't think anyone in this room, and I certainly know the general public, do not want to travel round on our networks with no second safety critical person on that train. Nobody. Last year, somebody come up here when this was debated, and they reported they were on a driver-only train coming to the TUC, and the alarm went off. And the driver came over the tannoy, "Is it a mistake? Have you meant to pull the alarm?" No one replied, apparently. So 10 minutes later, he said, "The alarm is still going off. It's in a toilet. Can you get off at the next station if you need help?" Just think about that. Was it someone having a heart attack? Were they being attacked in some way? They certainly needed help. Is that what we want? Can you get off at the next stop? A little while ago, we had another train. There was a landslide at Watford. The cab got separated. The driver got trapped. Thankfully, there was a guard on that train, and she evacuated people safely, turned off the power, and got everyone off in a safe manner.
Can you come to a close now?
These are real things that are going on. So when I say to you now, conference, we can't just move this and agree it unanimously. Everybody go back to your unions. All your members travel on the network. You all travel on the network. We in the RMT say we want a safe, accessible railway for all, and we say we want it publicly owned, publicly funded, and run for the people of this country and not for profit. I move.
Thank you. TSSA.
President Congress, Jill Murdoch, TSSA. Is private, sorry about this, first time I've spoken this morning. Is private profit a natural ally of safety for workers and for the public? I think Grenfell has tragically shown us it is not, as did the Hatfield and Potters Bar crashes in the early days of rail privatisation. Public transport should be about providing a service to the public, for people travelling for leisure or on business. But at present, the privatised public service that is the railway, and it's not the only one, of course, is purely about providing profits to owners and dividends to shareholders. There is nothing new about that. Indeed, it is why the railways were built in the first place, and historically, it did not take long for it to be found out as a bad idea. It's a point, however, that we have seemed to need to hammer home repeatedly to many people, hopefully mostly outside this hall. No profit-driven industry will retain staff in jobs that do anything more than just keeping the wheels on the train going round and round and the profits coming in. For the travelling public to have the luxury of open ticket offices, to have staff on trains, to have the safety, protection and assistance offered by a guard, and for workers to have proper staffing levels to maintain safety standards. On the privatised railway, these are becoming memories, dreams. Ticket office-free stations and driver-only operated trains offer the lure of more profit to the owners. Driving is a stressful job at the best of times. Hopping in and out to watch doors to see if it is safe to depart adds enormously to the pressure on drivers. Only a railway operated to provide a service as part of an integrated publicly owned transport service, rather than with the sole goal of profit, will offer the safety and accessibility that is required. This motion reaffirms the TUC's commitment to such a railway and welcomes the Labour Party's long-awaited manifesto commitment to public ownership of the railways and the buses. Make the railway a service to industry and the public again and in public ownership. Keep trains safe. Keep guards on trains. Support this motion.
Thank you. Unite.
President, Conference, Paul Ainsworth, Unite the Union, speaking in support of Motion 11. As a London bus driver from a union representing both rail and bus workers, I'm pleased to support this call for public ownership and control of our railways and indeed our buses as well. Conference, privatisation and deregulation have absolutely wrecked key parts of our transport sector. We need a shift away from further privatisation and deregulation and a move towards more public ownership and accountability. Deregulation of the bus industry outside London makes the strongest possible case for public control of buses. Research by Transport for Quality of Life shows a fundamental conflict between deregulation and a world-class bus system. They report that bus deregulation has seen higher fares, worse service, a fall in bus use and lower pay for bus workers. It really is the race to the bottom. In the big cities outside London, passenger journeys have halved from about £2 billion per year before deregulation to less than £1 billion now. The report also shows the best bus companies are municipals, like Reading, Lothian, Blackpool. They're run by local councils. And yet this government has driven through a bus bill which actually bans setting up any more, despite opposition from Labour. This government's plans for rail are another attempt to dismantle a key service in pursuit of private profit at the expense of passengers and rail workers. The same blind ideology that led to the disastrous privatisation of the railways, designed to appease the interests of privatised train operating companies. And yet 1.5 billion, think of that, 1.5 billion is a big, big number. Pounds could be saved over 5 years if routes including Northern, Transpennine and West Coast Main Line were operated by the public sector. Yet this government has ignored the facts and have extended franchises with disruption costs borne by us, the taxpayer, not the franchise holding not the franchise holder transferring investment risk. Unite welcomes the commitment in the Labour Party manifesto to bring private rail companies back into public ownership. And finally, Conference, what public ownership and control gives is the opportunity for a properly integrated transport system. Bus networks need to interlink with rail networks and park and ride systems. Public transport requires transferable ticketing and access to properly regulated taxis. Ports and airports need good road and rail links. Support a properly accountable, properly integrated and properly accessible public transport system. Please, comrades, I implore you, support the motion. Let's get our railways and buses back where they belong, back into public ownership.
Thank you. I will now put the motion to the vote. Will all those in favour please show? Will all those against please show? That motion is carried unanimously. Now call on motion 12, British Shipping. The General Council support the motion. Moved by Nautilus International, seconded by the RMT.
President, Congress, Ronnie Cunningham, Nautilus International, moving motion 12 on British Shipping. This year, in case you haven't noticed, marks the 150th anniversary of the shipping forecast. Well, I've got a shipping forecast for you. On current trends, the future of the British shipping industry, sadly, is in dire straits. In the space of a generation, we've gone from having an owned and registered fleet of more than 1,600 ships to just 452 last year. A very big drop. 60 years ago, the UK merchant fleet amounted for 18%, that's 18% of the world's total tonnage. Today, it's 0.8%. 40 years ago, there were nearly 90,000 British seafarers. Today, it's just 23,000, and with more than half of them over the age of 45, and with recruitment into the industry at less than half than what we need, these numbers are set to fall by a further third over the next 10 years. This devastating decline really matters for an island nation like Britain. Nearly 95% of everything we consume, from fuel to food, from TVs to telephones, come and go by sea. But more and more of it's coming and going on ships that are not actually fit to be at sea, with poorly paid and trained crew from low-cost labour countries. There are ships in our waters, UK waters, that have conditions that would have been shocking 250 years ago, let alone today in 2017. Take the case of the Panama flag cargo ship Tashin, currently detained in Sharpness docks, with a crew who were owed 3 months' wages and were forced to drink seawater and out-of-date food because the Turkish owners had failed to provide provisions for the ship. Well, what about the crew of the oil industry supply vessel, Malvia 7, who have been stranded in Aberdeen in Scotland for the past 15 months, with more than $850,000 US owed? And these are by no means isolated cases. All sides of the shipping industry have been sending out an SOS for many years now. And exactly 2 years ago, we thought we had got somewhere when the government's maritime growth study came up with 18 recommendations that ministers claimed would keep Britain as a great maritime nation. It's essential that the government delivers the Smart Plus plans for improved support for maritime training. For the price of less than half a mile of a motorway, ministers could ensure a substantial supply of British seafarers, with every pound of support delivering a £4.80 return for GDP. And this has got to be backed up by effective action to stamp out unfair competition and conditions akin to modern-day slavery. Effective employment laws shouldn't stop at the shoreline. We need proper enforcement of the national minimum wage and work permit requirements for all seafarers working on UK domestic shipping services. We should follow the example of other major maritime nations who have laws to protect their ships and their seafarers from unfair competition in their own waters from ships with substandard safety and working arrangements. Ministers keep saying that Britain needs to trade its way to the recovery. But if we don't have working arrangements in place for maritime trade in a post-Brexit world, our ambitions, sadly, will be sunk. Shipping is still an essential industry for a maritime nation. It's time we treated it one. Congress, I move.
Thank you. RNT.
Congress, President. Exactly 1 year ago today, I stood here following Nautilus on a similar subject called skills in the future. But I'd like to take that back because there's no skills and there's no future. Not in the British merchant fleet anyway. It's dying on its feet this very present day. If we don't do nothing about it now, I've been at sea for 47 years. And I've seen nothing like it. It's getting worse, week by week, month by month, even day by day. So I'd like to move this motion on behalf of Nautilus and the RMT, because we need to do it. We need to do it now. Not next week, not the week after, now. And like we're protesting Save the Guard on the train, the maritime industry's put out an SOS. We don't like the word SOS because it means someone's going to die. But SOS 2020, Save Our Seafarer. Please, I call upon you. We need to do this and we need to do it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. PCS.
President Congress, Dave Semple speaking on behalf of PCS in support of the motion, and drawing attention to the fact that it's 30 years since the disaster where the Herald of Free Enterprise sank, and 29 years, and it'll be 30 years next year, from the P&O dispute in Dover, where I first really learned how to be a trade unionist with the PCS. And my colleagues in Dover Shipping Branch remember well and tell all of their new reps the stories of what happens whenever an employer comes for staff and whenever a government doesn't back their seafarers to support staff. It results in 72 hours worth of shifts for people. It results in people falling asleep and not able to close gates. These are the kind of disasters that we can expect if we don't have the support of the government to redress the decline in the number of seafarers and also the decline in safety standards. I want to draw Congress's attention to the fourth operative clause, which talks about the Marine and Coast Guard Agency. Now, the Marine and Coast Guard Agency is in many respects is in the same dire straits as seafaring. There's not enough staff. You have watches where there aren't enough staff to really properly man the operations room. The Marine and Coast Guard Agency is our fourth emergency service, and it's a direct threat to search and rescue operations if we don't have the staff in there that we need, and it is also a direct threat to the safety of our seafarers. That's not acceptable, Congress, and we must absolutely pass this motion. There have other things been going on as well. The attempt to privatise the UK shipping register and the attempt to privatise as well the surveying work that goes on. This must be opposed because commercialising these kind of things will prevent us enforcing adequate safety standards on our ships and will prevent the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency being able to do its jobs. So, Congress, please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, I'm now going to put motion 12, British Shipping, to the vote. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. All those against? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. I now call motion 13, the super yacht sector. The General Council support the motion, moved by Nautilus International, seconded by the RMT.
Chair, Congress, Gary Elliott, Nautilus International, move motion 13 on the super yacht sector. And we just heard a discussion on the future of the merchant fleet and the future for young people that runs through the whole theme of the TUC and what we're here to talk about this week. And there is a future out there for young seafarers. It can be diversified into different sectors, and the super yacht sector is one of them sectors. Congress notes the massive growth of the super yacht industry and the thousands of new jobs for young British seafarers. It's estimated that 33,000 jobs are available just within the super yacht sector, and a large amount of them will be within the Red Ensign fleet on UK-registered vessels. So the opportunities are there. Nautilus International is at the forefront of organising members worldwide across this sector and making sure that there's good jobs. And in the themes, again, of the TUC, there are great jobs for young people, young British people, to enter into that sector. So we've seen a large influx, and we've got to make sure that it's heavily regulated, that they receive the benefits and make sure that they're protected via the trade union movement. So what is the reality? The reality is that for many, many decades, it's been heavily unregulated. No contracts of employment, no terms and conditions, no collective bargaining, no sick pay, no pensions, no social security, nothing. Someone turns up on the quayside, they get on a yacht, south of France, over to Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and then has to leave. And that has been the reality of what has actually occurred. Until a couple of years ago when we had the introduction of the Maritime Labour Convention. And that is imperative for any young people entering into the merchant navy part of the super yacht sector. Because what that brings with it is a minimum standard, a minimum requirement, contracts of employment, social security, pensions, sick pay, everything that everyone else would take as granted within their normal employment. So from a Nautilus perspective, there's another element to it as well, which is heavily within the MLC, the Maritime Labour Convention. And that's the isolation. That's the fear of harassment, bullying, discrimination, age discrimination, etc., etc. And we, again, are at the forefront to make sure that doesn't occur and that we're organising our people. Wherever they are, that's where we are, worldwide. So Congress calls for the TUC to support and secure action to get effective enforcement of the Maritime Labour Convention, ensuring global standards apply for British seafarers. Working conditions, wages, hours of work, leave. It's vital that the Maritime Labour Convention is applied, given that 2/3 of the world's super yachts use the UK flag. So therefore I ask conference to please support.
Thank you. Seconded by the RNT.
Good morning, President, Conference. Calson Lingwood, Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers Union. Pleased to support and second this very worthy motion, which, if you reflect on motions that were passed yesterday, in particular the composite number 2, the safety risks of light touch regulation, what we're considering here is no regulation, a sector which is currently deregulated. And if we also want to look, and if you look at page 13, 2017 to 2018 TUC campaign plan, this moves directly into this area because those seafarers, those workers we're talking about in this sector are young workers. And we already know 6% of 21 to 30-year-olds in the private sector are trade union members. So what this delivers is minimum standards. The Maritime Labour Convention 2006 is an international labour organisation convention. And it's not just about your contract or your terms and conditions. It's actually some of the basics you'd expect, some of the basics you take for granted if you work ashore, such as your accommodation, your food, the quality of that food, health protection, medical care, welfare, and even social security protection. Things you'd take for granted if you were working ashore. And this sector, young workers, thousands of miles away from home, where do they turn? Who do they look to? if they've got an issue where there's no respect in the workplace, are they expected to stand up in a sector where you're dealing with not millionaires, but billionaires? So I'd urge you to support and to return this unanimously, because it absolutely fits hand in glove with what this Congress has spoken about yesterday and the plan that's been mapped ahead in the next 2 years. So support these young workers. It's a good opportunity. There's opportunities there for young workers to make their way in the world, but let's protect them. Let's respect them, and let's make sure they're not discriminated against, that they have proper protection in the workplace, and they actually enjoy their working lives. So, seconding this and urging you all to support.
Thank you very much. Now going to put motion 13 to the vote, the super yacht sector. The General Council support the motion. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. I now call motion 14, transport policy bus services. The General Council support the motion. It's moved by the TSSA, seconded by Unite, and Unison have indicated that they want to speak.
It's all right, I could have stood up. President Conference, Mick Carney, TSSA. Back in 1985, the Tories introduced the Transport Act. As with anything produced by the Tories at the time, it was all about the introduction of competition, this time across bus services. Bus deregulation was supposed to introduce competition and improve services to the consumer, and as ever, it failed. It allowed operators to cherry-pick which route to support and which was left to wither on the vine. It led to chaos. Profitable routes were fought over, in some cases literally. It led to gridlock. I personally remember the nightmare it caused in Darlington town centre. Bus drivers fighting in the streets, cutting each other up and blocking bus stops from rival companies. Deregulation led to unsafe work practices and an increase in dangerous buses running on our roads. And yet, 30 years on, the fated Tory mantra of competition has been stifled by the big companies. Over 70% of the market is controlled by the big five. Arriva, now a Deutsche Bahn and a Bellio conglomerate, Stagecoach, First, Go Ahead and Viola. The very same leeches sucking a profit on the back of our railways. I was back in Darlington recently, hoping to catch a bus after 7 o'clock in the evening. Now there isn't enough bus drivers there to have a hearty squabble, never mind a fight. Services are being cut to the bone. Buses cancelled with no notice. When one does turn up, a driver's copping it in the ear from irate passengers asking him to explain why no bus had turned up. Well, it's simple. It's because of the cutbacks made by the very same privateers who now hold a privatised monopoly across our towns and cities. Bus services are still the most popular and affordable form of public transport in this country and are as important as ever. But concern remains that the numbers are falling. Back in 1986, Thatcher was quoted as saying, "A man beyond the age of 26 who finds himself on a bus can count himself to be a failure." Now, this quote may or may not be true, but what cannot be denied is the Tory love of the car. The car they have long held has been synonymous as a symbol of success. Jeremy Clarkson, the country's leading petrol head, attended Thatcher's funeral back in 2014. But now the cost of driving, especially for the young, but also for working families, is becoming more and more prohibitive. I won't use that word again. Car insurance for 17 to 20-year-olds is on average over £3,800 a year. That, along with the 1,000 plus that it costs for the, on average, 47 driving lessons. Car usage among the young continues to fall, and they rely on other forms of public transport. But it's not just those that can't afford to drive. The elderly often rely on bus services. In rural areas especially, the lack of affordable transport can leave them isolated. A recent Tory bus bill is somewhat unusual for a Tory bill. It actually has some decent stuff in there, but as ever there's a catch. Clause 21 seeks to prevent local authorities from setting up municipals. 12 municipals exist across the country, outside of London. They come under much closer council control and under much more scrutiny. They encourage regulation of services. To deny local authorities this right denies them a stronger hand when dealing with the privateers. Municipals, such as in Reading, Nottingham and Edinburgh, consistently provide better service than the private operators. A decade of Tory austerity has left many without the means to drive and many communities isolated. We need to review what is best, what serves the travel needs of all, and what will only come with public-owned and publicly run bus services. Buses should be affordable. Buses are green. One bus can take up to 50 cars off the road, and bus services are exactly that, a service. Conference, please support.
Thank you. Seconded by Unite.
Can it come up a bit? Thanks. President Congress, Diana Holland seconding motion 14 on transport policy bus services as Assistant General Secretary for Unite's 250,000 transport workers. Getting our transport services right, all of them, is vital for jobs, families, communities, for the economy, the environment, and for social justice too. It's time for integrated transport for all. Buses are the most frequently used, and it's been said the most democratic form of public transport. They are lifelines of our communities for people of all ages, younger and older alike, and women in particular. Yet their importance is often overlooked or taken for granted. But as has been said, the legacy of 30 years since the shameful Tory privatisation and deregulation of our buses and austerity cuts on top mean many communities, particularly rural communities, feel let down and left out. What use is a bus pass if there's no bus? Services designed and run for private profit, not local need. While every day Unite's 90,000 bus workers face threats to their pay and pensions in the race to the bottom on standards. It's just no way to run a bus service. So our amendment to this motion is about what's happening in the bus industry right now. This year's Bus Services Act enables re-regulation of buses, which is of course welcome, but it's in the implementation of that re-regulation. We have to make sure that that happens, and the union must be at the table as agreed, as of right, together with the agreed TUPE and pension rights, rights that we must win for new workers too. As Paul said earlier, the Bus Act could also have provided an opportunity to extend bus use satisfaction and to save £506 million a year through municipal operation, bringing buses into public control and ownership while meeting local needs. But the government inserted that clause in the Act to ban councils from setting up new municipal bus companies. They are hell-bent on destroying all levels of our democracy. So if we want the best for the bus industry, for workers and for our communities, we need to join together today to get that clause out. A decent, accountable bus service is within our grasp. It's what people who use buses want, it's what bus workers want, it's what our movement wants, and it's good for our environment too. Conference, please support. Thank you.
Thank you. Now can we have TSSA, please? Sorry, no, Unison, please, sorry.
Ruth Davis, Unison, speaking in support of motion 14. Congress, Unison is pleased to support the excellent motion by TSSA with the important amendment from Unite. Our members in bus companies and in the passenger transport executives are working every day to deliver excellent bus services. Beyond this, many thousands of our members and fellow workers depend on the buses to get to and from work at hospitals, schools and council offices. The motion is quite right that local control of bus services is crucial in making sure that services meet strategic local needs. Services need to be coordinated with shifts at hospitals and school timetables and to serve estates, suburbs and villages properly. Deregulation, yes, that old favourite. Deregulation has prevented this across the whole country, other than in London, where bus deregulation never happened. It is no coincidence that only in London has bus use increased since the 1980s. The Bus Services Act, which came in this year, gives our cities a new way to control bus services through franchising. Andy Burnham, as Mayor of Greater Manchester, is going to be taking this forward, and hopefully that will show how effective this mechanism can be. So the tide is turning, but franchising is unlikely to work for rural areas or small towns. So the motion is quite right that we need to see more change. The ban on starting municipal bus companies needs to be reversed, as cities which never sold off their bus companies, including the likes of Reading and Nottingham, have already proved the effectiveness of the model. And the full impact of funding or cutting services needs to be properly taken into account when authorities are deciding whether services should be supported. The motion is absolutely right that buses are critical for social and community inclusion, when over 60% of job seekers and 65% of single pensioners simply have no access to a car. And that's before we think about young workers who are simply trying to get to work and from work. So, Congress, please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I'm going to put motion 14, Transport Policy Bus Services, to the vote. The General Council support the motion. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against? The motion is carried unanimously. Delegates, we stay with Section 1 of the General Council report, the Economy and Creative Industries. I call motion 15, Valuing Entertainment Workers. The General Council support the motion. Moved by Equity, seconded by the Musicians' Union and supported by Prospect. Could all the speakers come to the front and be ready to speak? Thank you.
Congress, President Mary Lane Equity, proposing motion 15, Valuing Entertainment Workers, and first time at Congress. I'm a singer, entertainer, Bristolian, and proudly working class. Being working class and having a successful career in the entertainment industry is sadly not the norm. It is a startling fact that over 90% of jobs in the creative economy are held by people in more advantaged socio-economic groups. Historically, variety and entertainment, the areas in which I've mostly worked, having been one of the most important routes for working class people to access a career in the performing arts. Working in live entertainment was my job, but also my route into trade unionism. In May, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Equity and the Variety Artists Federation joining together. The amalgamation came about largely in response to the growth of commercial TV in the late 50s and early 60s. Equity and the VAF were at that time heavily engaged in negotiations to secure contractual agreements for performers. Both unions went out on strike against ITV to win better terms for their members in 1961. During and in the period following the dispute, it became clear that one union representing variety artists and performers would be stronger and better able to counter the power of the employers. This remains the case. Today, thousands of entertainers are at work around the country, performing in working men's clubs, pubs, circuses, care homes, at weddings, in public spaces, and many other venues. These performers often face huge challenges in the course of their working lives, including nighttime and loan working, withholding of payments by deliberately making the booking a no pickup, where the performer gets his fee from the agent, sometimes weeks later. Closure of venues and health and safety risks involving PAT tests for electrical equipment, which are advisory but not mandatory, and yet a performer can be denied work in particular venues if no PAT test is available. They are largely self-employed and can experience huge problems accessing social security, help with housing, and parental entitlements. Providing insurances, legal support and other services for these workers is vital, but we need to do more than that to ensure that we are valued, able to earn a living, and that our jobs don't disappear. We need help to campaign against the closure of entertainment values threatened by developers wanting to turn them into luxury flats, and for the agent of change to be fully incorporated into planning laws. We need help to lobby the government to recognise the right of all self-employed workers to access welfare and to challenge all employers who do not pay the living wage. We also need to expose agents who exploit workers and push for licensing and an increase in powers and resources for inspectors enforcing existing agencies' legislation. Currently, performers effectively appear at many showcase events with no guarantee of paid work and are sometimes offered contracts whereby they aren't even told what venues are being charged for their performance by an agent. More broadly, we need to continue to campaign for working class representation in all art forms, higher education fees in secure and atypical work, low and no pay in some sectors, unconscious and conscious bias, and many other factors are stopping equal access to the arts, as well as organising and campaigning to remove these barriers. We must value and protect those routes, particularly live entertainment, that have helped working class people gain a foothold in the entertainment industry. Please support. Thank you.
Thank you. Musicians' Union.
President, Conference, Barbara White, Musicians' Union, seconding motion 15. As you already know, this year is the 50th anniversary of the amalgamation of Equity and the Variety Artists Federation. Equity has celebrated by doing their best to highlight the work done by entertainment workers and to ensure that they receive the awards and support they deserve. Equity, the Musicians' Union, the Writers' Guild are always trying to ensure that people understand that we're not a frivolous group of people, but workers, the same as all present, who deserve good working rights, including health and safety, which is frequently absent through lack of enforcement. It isn't a glamorous profession, but one which demands hard work, frequently for little pay, and in some cases, people expect you to work for nothing. As a member of the public, you enter a venue, frequently walking on a lovely new carpet. Where the carpet ends is where the entertainers start their work. Sometimes the working conditions are appalling. Lack of dressing rooms and toilets. Quite frequently, the dressing rooms are used to store tables and chairs, which aren't required. In order to get to your place of employment, you might have to leave home at about 2 p.m. and arrive home about 12 hours later. Are you lucky enough to have a child, I ask? This is the time that you might not think you're so lucky when it comes to arranging a babysitter. We are all aware of the cost and problems attached to babysitters, but you try to find one happy to sit until 2 or 3 a.m. We read on a daily basis of a pub or a venue closing down. These are the venues where young artists learn to cut their teeth. We are all aware of the need for more homes, but as the Women's Trade Union song says, we ask for bread, but roses too. Developers are the people who seem to know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. I'm sure that many of you remember where we cut our trade union teeth, in little clubs, singing such songs as the Ballad of Joe Hill. These are the small venues that are vital to live performers, but are seen as nothing more than money by property developers. Many people don't understand the value of live entertainment venues that are threatened by developers. They read something in the, pardon me while I swear, the Sun or the Daily Snail, about new homes at affordable prices, and they believe it. Affordable, or as another entertainment worker, Ricky Tomlin, might say, my derriere. Please support this motion.
Thank you. And can we have Prospect, please?
Can this come up a little bit? I don't normally have to say that. Thank you. President Congress, Denise Maguire of Prospect to support and particularly to address the issues faced by BEC2 members, now part of Prospect. Firstly, no pay. To get into the skilled and technical jobs in audiovisual production, people often have to work for free. And we're not talking about short volunteering options or a week's internship. We're talking months. People contribute so much that when the credits roll, their names are in that list at the end of the production because that's what they're asked for when they apply for jobs. Ordinary working class families and working families can't afford this. As Mary said, it's a class issue. You need the bank of mum and dad. As my BEC2 colleague Mike said yesterday, this shameful model is the cynical business planning of some of the richest companies in the entertainment industry. Respectable, properly funded productions exploit workers. Some independent films operate like this too. In their case, that volunteers are told that they will benefit spiritually from their experience. But these alleged volunteers make a genuine economic contribution and get no pay. It's shameful, Congress, totally shameful. On upfront payments to agencies, I need to get a bit technical. The conduct regulations of 93 and 2003 state that somebody seeking work can't be charged in advance, except for the entertainment industry. Background artists, some of you know them as extras, are the lowest paid end of the acting profession. They work through agencies because the production companies won't deal with them directly. Agencies want upfront payments, everything from £50 to £150, but there is no guarantee that any work will arise from that payment. And if you haven't paid up front, the agency's fee is taken from your fees when they do get paid. So it's either pay now or we take it from your earnings. Upfront fees are abhorrent and abusive. They exploit genuine workers and they're bait for unsuspecting members of the public who think they're in with a chance to appear on the screen. So we say no exception for the entertainment industry. And on Low Pay Congress, I want to give a shout out to the mostly young members and reps fighting for the living wage in our dispute at the Ritzy Cinema and with the Picture House across London and here in Brighton. Thank you, Congress. Well done to them, and thanks to all of you for your support. So please, support the boycott of Picture House cinemas, support the strike fund, and please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the end of the speakers. So I'm calling now motion 15 to the vote, valuing entertainment workers. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. I now call upon motion 16, 1% for art. The General Council support the motion with an explanation, and I will call upon the Deputy General Secretary to explain the General Council position during the debate. It's moved by the Artists Union England and seconded by Equity.
President, Congress and fellow trade unionists, Martin Sundram moving motion 16 on behalf of Artists Union England. This is our first Congress as an affiliated trade union. And indeed our first ever motion, which perhaps shows slightly. And it is indeed my first time, or anybody from our union, speaking to Congress. Within this motion, there are, I hope, a couple of principles A big aspiration and a modest proposal. The idea of a 1% for Arts scheme, where those involved in public building and renovation projects commits to investing a minimum of 1% of budgets to commissioning art from living, working artists, not a Rembrandt in the safe, and takes place in various parts of Europe, the US and elsewhere in the world, with varying degrees of success, it has to be said. It has never succeeded in getting off the ground here in the UK, despite some historic local attempts. This, for us, is an example of how our country has not traditionally respected the work artists do outside the glittering world of the few that do enjoy commercial success and sell the work for high prices in the commercial auction rooms of London. Of course, superstar salaries at one end of the pay spectrum and sub-minimal wage or working for nothing lifestyles at the other is something we share with our colleagues in other entertainment unions. Creative industries suffer from the misapprehension that somehow what we are doing is our hobby and not our jobs. The first principle is this: being a professional artist is a job like any other, but one that shares many of the disadvantages that seems to afflict those working in the leisure and creative sectors. Artists, alongside musicians, actors, technicians and other workers in these fields, need to work for a living, often in extremely insecure conditions and often with long periods with little income from their chosen profession at all. Although those who choose this difficult and uncertain career path have chosen something that they love to do, or hopefully, it's not their hobby. It is for those who choose it, their job and their profession. We're proud that visual artists are now part of the trade union movement, and we're indebted to our colleagues across the union world for helping to make this happen. Artists Union England is now unionising a part of the workforce that has not had an independent voice in the workplace in England before, despite attempts in the past to create one. Scotland, however, has had an artists union for a decade now, and we've both worked with them and learned from them as they encounter many of the issues that we'll be facing ourselves south of the border. In short, we need trade union help to support the principle of creating paid work for artists. The second principle we wanted to highlight is that artists can have something to directly contribute to communities, and that investment in art is an investment in society. This country is in desperate need of publicly funded housing and other community building projects and policies that genuinely raise the quality of people's lives. Our big aspiration is for artists to be part of that transformation, and that investment in art should become a normal part of planning decisions taken by government and its agencies. We'll be back asking for support from our trade union colleagues when we attempt to lobby government and its agencies on a % for arts scheme in all future public building projects. But I said we've come with a modest proposal. We'd like trade unions in the first instance to set the benchmark and be in the vanguard when renovating or building, to incorporate a % for art in all such projects. It's important to say at this stage we're not being prescriptive about mechanisms that might put this motion into action. We simply want to see artists paid for the work they do, and that art is recognised as an important part of the working as well as the gallery and the living environment. An aspiration to the idea of a % for art when unions set out their own budgets would help to normalise the idea of art in every workplace and public building, and in doing so support artists as workers like any other. Congress, I move this motion.
Thank you. Seconded by Equity.
Morning, Congress. Louise McMullen, Equity, seconding motion 16. But before speaking directly to the motion, I just wanted to briefly welcome Martin and the rest of the Artists Union of England to the Federation of Entertainment Unions. For anyone who doesn't know, the FEU is a subcommittee within the TUC that brings together all those unions representing creative and cultural workers, including Equity, the NUJ, the PFA, the BEC2 section of Prospect, the Writers Guild, the Musicians Union, and Unite. It's great to have the Artists Union join us, and we look forward to working and campaigning alongside you. We welcome the sentiments behind this motion very much. To us, the motion speaks to the need we have as a movement to reclaim access to art for working people. Barbara from the Musicians Union beat me to it already this morning, but I'm going to say it again. Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. This isn't just a pretty song, it's the expression of a right that we as working people have to enjoy the good things in life beyond our basic needs. The motion also reminds us once again of the need to ensure that artistic jobs are not limited to those who can afford to work for free or as close to free as possible. So many do because there is so little access to funds at the grassroots level right now. For us, a whole superstructure is built on an inadequately funded base that in other industries would simply be regarded as research and development. In our sector, sadly, that initial investment is all too often the free labour of arts workers. We know that in our union, at least 40% of our members have worked without pay at least once in the last 12 months. This is a decrease on previous years, but we have a long way to go before no and low pay work in our industry is eradicated. Finally, we recognise, as Martin's just said, that it might not be realistic, as the motion calls for, to expect all affiliates in the TUC to commit straight away to the 1% for Arts scheme, but it's certainly an aspiration that we think is worth supporting longer term. If trade unions are prepared to lead the way, public bodies are more likely to follow what is a great aspiration. So please support the motion.
Thank you. And I call upon the Deputy General Secretary to explain the General Council's attitude to the motion.
President, Congress, Paul Novak, Deputy General Secretary, just explaining the General Council's position, which is to support motion 16 with an explanation. First of all, though, let me add my voice to the welcome to our newest affiliate, the Artists' Union of England, a new union representing artists, many of them young, in one of our most important creative industries, giving artists a much-needed collective voice, tackling the insecurity that affects most of the profession, and highlight not just the cultural importance of art, but its economic significance too. Now, motion 16 calls for Congress to endorse the principle that unions spend 1% of their budget for major construction or refurbishment works on commissioning public art. And the General Council supports that principle, supports the motion, but with this explanation. We all agree that public art makes buildings, our public spaces, indeed our workplaces, nicer, more attractive, more interesting places to be. At Congress House, the TUC is fortunate enough to have a number of magnificent pieces of art in the building, including an Epstein sculpture. But while obviously unions would like to invest more in art and artists, at the moment the 1% figure should be seen as an aspiration rather than a target or a binding commitment on unions. In these straitened times, with our finances under pressure, our members requiring yet more and more support, we obviously have to make difficult and balanced judgments when it comes to resources. So please support the motion. Please welcome the Artists' Union of England to the TUC family, and please get behind British art and British artists. Thank you.
Now I call UCU.
Good morning, President, Congress. Joanna de Groot, UCU, very happy to support motion 16. When I walk into my union's headquarters, I'm delighted to see the fine photographs which we have put on the walls of our ground floor to be enjoyed by the people who work there and the people who visit there. They are, of course, the work of photographic artists whose skill and creativity gives us pleasure and stimulates thought. And I think the principle of art in the workplace, as in other parts of life, is a very, very fine one. Support for artists and artwork is therefore support for something which improves our lives, but it is also support for workers in the creative industry who are our fellow workers. Public art is a public good. Art workers are valued workers who deserve the proper opportunity to use their talent and skill. Not just for individual patrons, but for public and civil society bodies. We recognise that unions may not be able to make immediate financial commitments to a 1% for art. We do support the principle and the need for the fair and transparent ways to make funds available to artists. Please support motion 16.
Thank you. I'm now going to put motion 16, 1% for art, to the vote. All those in favour, please show. All those against? That's carried unanimously. Delegates, we turn to section 5 of the General Council report, Strong Unions, the section on organising, from page 56. I call paragraph 5.1 and motion 71, valued workers. The General Council support the motion. It's moved by the NASUWT, seconded by Unison, and the National Education Union have indicated they wish to speak.
President, Congress, Fred Bryan, NASUWT Teachers Union, moving motion 71 on valued workers. Over recent years, successive Conservative and Conservative-led governments have launched attack after attack on ordinary working people and their ability to organise in defence of their hard-earned terms and conditions of employment. The consequences of these attacks are clear. 1.7 million people employed on zero-hours contracts, with numbers rising steadily. Wages stagnating on year as executive pay explodes, with some receiving 40% pay increases last year alone, while public sector workers have faced real-term pay cuts for nearly a decade. Employers attempting to deny the rights of workers with impunity, aided and abetted by the government's imposition of employment tribunal fees intended to deny workers natural justice, thus demonstrating the importance of Unison's recent victory on this issue. Congress, we have seen some truly shocking examples of employers creating conditions akin to Victorian workhouses rather than the 21st century workplaces. And education is no exception. Supply teachers are increasingly exploited by unscrupulous agencies, often through the use of offshore-based umbrella companies, and where abuses include teachers being required to pay their employers' national insurance contributions. And this abuse is not just confined to supply teachers. The latest figures from the NASUWT's annual Big Question survey revealed that 71% of teachers experienced a culture of blame or criticism. Almost two-thirds reported that their well-being was not considered important by their employer, and 3/5 that their jobs had impacted negatively on their mental health. A third did not feel respected by the employer. However, we must recognise that there are employers who treat their employees fairly, with dignity and respect, and these employers should be recognised and used as an example to those poor employers, and to highlight the prospective employees, the employers who will treat them well. And for this reason, the NASUWT has, in partnership with GMB, Unison and Unite, been developing the Valued Worker Scheme, setting out principles of good employment practice that employers are asked to sign up to. These principles include ensuring that workers have safe working environments, are treated with dignity and respect, are able to access continuing professional development, have good pay and conditions, including a commitment to the living wage, and have formal agreed mechanisms for working in partnership with trade unions. It is hoped that the Value Worker Scheme will cause the poorer employers to up their game. It will also provide trade unions with leverage over employers who wish to be seen as the employer of choice. We already have a number of employers, large and small, who wish to sign up to the scheme. By opposing and campaigning against poor employers while simultaneously developing relationships with good employers, we can achieve the aims of this motion. Congress, we must work together to ensure that every example of poor practice is challenged and union membership is developed in underrepresented workplaces. And we must also work with the many good employers and highlight the good practice that exists in workplaces to further pressurise those that refuse to treat their staff with dignity and respect. Congress, please support this motion.
Thank you. Unison to second.
President, Congress, Margaret McKee from Unison, pleased to be seconding motion 71 on valued workers. Congress, Unison is a great believer in joint union working. We work with sister unions where and when we can to defend workers' rights. The pressures caused by real-term funding cuts across the UK have had a significant effect on education support staff, leading to significant job cuts across the UK in recent years. The fear of job losses added to Tory trade union laws, which have undermined the principles of secure employment in the education sector, have put back the whip into the hands of the employers. We hope that Unison's win on tribunal fees at the Supreme Court can be seen as one way of redressing that imbalance of power in the workplace. Our highest court was clear when they give ministers a lesson straight from the textbooks. Rights are worthless if you cannot afford to enforce them, and employers can act with impunity. Congress, if it was right at the time of the Magna Carta, it is right in the 21st century. Yet, sadly, alongside redundancies, many employers have taken the opportunity to make terms and conditions weaker. We've seen the proliferation of low-paid jobs and precarious employment, which has led to major inconsistencies, such as support staff being paid on term-time contracts, while most teachers can access all-year-round contracts. We've also seen the move to academy and free schools in England further undermine employment rights and trade union organisation, as some seek to limit facility time. In this light, it is important to ensure that we encourage school and college employers to treat workers well and recognise the important role of trade unions in the workplace. Therefore, joint work with our sister support staff unions and led by the NASUWT to ensure that employers value their workers is a welcome additional campaign. It is important that workers feel welcome and able to join trade unions, that the reach of unions is extended across the education sector, and that as unions we continue to show solidarity with one another by respecting established boundaries for recruitment and organising. Congress, workers face continued hostility from the government and employers. We need to make sure that our members are valued employees, and a campaign to get employers to accept this can only benefit us all. How many times over the years have you heard the employer or management say, "You're lucky you have a job"? No, you're lucky you have such dedicated workers. Thank you, Congress. Please support the motion.
Thank you. National Education Union.
Good morning. President Conference, National Education Union, Amanda Martin. To be valued as a worker should be a fundamental right afforded to all in the UK. Poor quality conditions, low pay, victimisation, hostile environments, fear of job losses, ever-changing terms and conditions and inequality are sadly today still too frequent occurrences in the workplace, particularly in the workplace where unions simply are not present. The image of the trade union movement depends on which media outlet you look at. Public enemy number one, enemies of promise, male, pale and stale. But this view is at best outdated. Historically, trade unions have stood up for all union members and all workers. And recent photographs of demonstrations show the demographics of what a trade unionist looks like is rightly changing. And it is vital that we promote that trade unions are for all workers. The trade union movement, for me, is the family you choose to belong to. We in this room need to do our bit by promoting the positives of the trade union movement, and do our bit by recruiting non-union members, and do our bit by speaking proudly of the successes of the trade union movement as a whole. Nationally, I'm fortunate and proud to be in a strong, progressive union, a union that makes a difference, a movement, not a monument. Locally, I'm fortunate and extremely proud to be the secretary of a thriving, active division, developing grassroots activists. 9 out of 12 of my officers are women. Working in education, managing caring responsibilities, successful in their careers and proud trade unionists, committing to helping and supporting others. But nationally and locally, the National Education Union do not work in silos, but we stand side by side with our sister trade unionists, supporting and standing in solidarity on so many issues. The National Education Union wholeheartedly supports this motion, and particularly bullet point C. We too commend the partnership formed between unions and the successes that this can bring. The late, great General Secretary of the National Union of Teachers, Steve Sinnott, always said, working together is winning together. We have heard in Trade Union Congress 17, in Composite 9, how the Scrap the Cap campaign needs us all to unite to ensure that public sector pay is addressed. We have heard in the TUC 17 from our President, how Steve's mantras played a huge part in the success of the school funding campaign, in the general election and in bringing this information to the public. www.schoolcuts.org.uk successfully brought together the NUT, the ATL, NHT, GMB, Unite the Union and Unison. Conference, I think you will agree, a formidable force. and just one example of collected trade union. But conference, this is a campaign that is far from over. As Justine Greening at the end of term announced 1.8 billion, we still do not know where that money has come from. We do not know where it is going, to which pupils. It is recycled. We, the National Education Union, taking this campaign forward, want to extend our hand to all sister education unions to join this formidable force. Please come together and work with us so that we together can ensure the real enemies of promise are the Tory government.
Thank you. I now put motion 71, valued workers, to the vote. All those in favour, please show. All those against? That's carried unanimously. Now move to motion 72, a new model of trade unionism, moved by the CWU, seconded by the Society of Radiographers. The General Council support the motion. The National Education Union have indicated they wish to speak.
President, Congress, Dave Wald, CWU, to move motion 72. And the CWU believe that there's never been a better time and a more important time for us to come together, led by Francis, and have a more honest, more open, more constructive discussion on what is the best model of trade unionism to reassert our values across society and in workplaces, and to make sure that we actually shape the future world of work. Let me say from the outset, I actually sense that the tide is turning, and I think we all recognise there's some fantastic people in our movement. There always has been in all unions, at the workplace, some great local reps, and there's a lot going on at the moment, and there's a lot for us to be proud about, and we need to build on that. But we also have to recognise that last year, the recorded figures of loss of trade union membership across the whole of our movement was 275,000 less people in the trade union movement now than the year before. What that also means is that density of our movement and the coverage of collective bargaining is at a record low. Now contrast that with what's happened within the Labour Party under Corbyn's leadership. Labour has trebled its membership. It has definitely broken through with young people. And what you're seeing there, surely, must be an opportunity for us to say to some of those young people, yes, you can change society politically, but you know what? You can also change it through industrial work and belonging to trade unions. And what we're calling for is the TUC to lead a major transformative project where we can all input into it. No one's got all the one answers to this, but we can all bring our collective enthusiasm, our collective experience to really have a proper discussion about this. We've listed a few things in the motion that we just want to run through. So what we're saying we should consider, not exhaustive. One, we should see how we can significantly increase the levels of engagement with members. Hear a lot about the trade union laws. None of us like them, but we've got them. But I tell you what would be fantastic is if we use the attack to turn it back on them by engaging with members and smashing through that threshold and getting it a regular thing across our movement when there's strike ballots. That would be a great thing for this movement. How we strengthen local workplace activism. CWU's undertaken a redesign project at the moment, and what we want to do is make sure that what the outcome of that is we add an amount of income, more of it needs to be going to the front line. That is where unions will strengthen. It's not about the bureaucracy of our organisations, it's about the front line. We need to improve the cooperation, the methods and effectiveness of organising. And I know there's some unions out there who are way ahead of where our thinking is at the moment on organising. You're doing some great stuff, but let's share it. There's also too much internal competition in our movement at the moment on organising, and there's a little bit of a trend coming in that we need to counter, where when we put the pressure on to get organising done, the bosses and the employers are starting to choose which union they want. And that can't be right. What's the best, a stronger focus, for the TUC in coordinating solidarity and supporting workers in dispute. We think that needs to become the clearest and strongest focus of the TUC overall. We think that's the role of the TUC, and we want to see what is the role of the TUC. Let's have that debate going forward as well. Bringing forward a younger generation of representatives is clearly a priority. But let the young people shape what the future of our movement is, not just bring them through as reps. Let them tell us what they think we need to do. Ensuring the whole movement better reflects the gender, ethnicity and diversity of the workforce, and improving the scope and reach of collective and sectorial bargaining. This is a moment where if we have that honest discussion, we're optimistic that we're on the way back as a movement. The signs are there, and we believe this particular project, if we all input into it, will deliver a new deal for workers and will reassert trade union values in society. So I move. Cheers. Thank you.
Society of Radiographers.
President, Congress, Paul Maloney, Society of Radiographers, seconding motion 72. Congress, this is a very important motion and we need not only to support it but to implement it fully. But let's not be defensive and inward-looking. This country needs a strong trade union movement, and this motion is about proactively making sure that we recognise the obligation we have to the millions of our members and the millions who should be our members to make sure this movement remains strong. Colleagues, as has already been said this week, we are a successful movement, and let's look at the evidence. The CWU's groundbreaking, pragmatic and forward-thinking approach to pensions in the Royal Mail, their suggested middle ground between defined benefit and defined contribution pension schemes has attracted interest across the political spectrum. Unite's groundbreaking work to force better employment conditions in Sports Direct, working with shareholders to persuade them that their interests are very much linked to those of the workforce in the company, again an approach that is both pragmatic and progressive. And Unison's success over the employment tribunal fees in the highest court in the land was a little short of astonishing. A victory not just for this movement, but also for democracy, as the ability of citizens to call government to account under the law remains a fundamental requirement that stops a democracy becoming a dictatorship. Another pragmatic but progressive action by a trade union this year. And there are many other examples. So what does that have to do with this motion? Well, quite simply, we should not be losing members with this approach to the problems thrown up by this dangerous and dysfunctional government. These three examples and the many others, not least of which are the successes achieved by my own union in pushing forward the contribution radiographers can make to improving the nation's health, show how successful we are. But the latest membership figures show that we're losing members at an alarming rate and density levels are at an all-time low and getting lower. That's not the case for all unions. Some of the smaller unions have much higher density levels than the average. My own union has more reps than ever, the vast majority under 45, and has increased membership in each of the last 5 years, with our density now about 90% among registered radiographers. This growth, by the way, began when we participated in a national strike over pay and has not stopped since. However, we need an honest assessment of what puts people off joining unions today. It's certainly not our record of success or our approach to resolving problems, our commitment to the values society holds dear, or our dogged determination to represent working people despite the constraints placed upon us by the state. But we can't carry on in decline. Ultimately, there's no point my union having 90% density levels if we are one of only a few unions in that position. We and our members need strong representation, a strong representative movement as much as anyone. We can stand up for radiographers, but our members need a strong movement standing up for education, decent transport and for the arts, among all the other things we do. So colleagues, please support this motion. Let's have the review it calls for. Let's learn from every union and let's apply the same pragmatic but progressive approach that has delivered such important and groundbreaking victories this year. Congress, please support the motion.
Thank you. National Education Union.
President, Congress, Going Little, National Education Union speaking in support of Motion 72, a new model of trades unionism. This is one of the most important motions in front of us this week. If we don't get this issue right, if we don't fundamentally change the way we work in order to reverse the decline in trade union membership, organisation and collective bargaining, everything else we commit ourselves to at this Congress becomes meaningless. If we don't have the industrial and political power to put our policies into action, they remain just that, policies. The motion rightly identifies its first three priorities as engaging members and reps, strengthening workplace activism, and improving the effectiveness of our organising work. It's absolutely essential these remain our key priorities as they address the fundamental role of trade unions to organise workers, to give them power to negotiate improvements in their working lives. It goes on to identify the importance of bringing forward a younger generation of members and activists. To do this, the project must include a review of the TUC's young member structures and must include the views of our existing young members in that review. However, trade unions also have another fundamental role, an educative role. In organising workers to improve their terms and conditions, unions give agency to working people. They allow them to understand the conditions of the society that they live in and how to change those conditions. By giving power to working people through acting collectively, they change those people's world outlook. This is an essential function, and to do it, unions need to invest in trade union education. Our current organising takes place against a backdrop of a massive decline in the power of working people. This necessarily means that we will suffer defeats and setbacks as well as victories. Workers who understand that there is an endless struggle for control over work and wages, and that problems arise from fundamental difference of interests between them and their employer, are much better equipped to take a longer and more strategic view of events in the workplace. Rather than attribute setbacks and defeats to individual failings or flaws in the organising approach, they see them in the context of the power relations in society. But all of this takes effective political trade union education, and that means investment. The attacks by this government on trade union education funding are a blow to our movement, but they also provide an opportunity to reinvent and redevelop the trade union education we need for a new model of trade unionism. Congress, please support this motion and let's review and change our practice. But let's also take a long, hard look at our unions and the priority that we give to trade union education. It's a fundamental, not an optional extra. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to put motion 72, a new model of trade unionism, to the vote. Will those in favour please show? Thank you. All those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Conference, I now call motion 73, collective bargaining, good for football and good for all of us. And despite my statement in the Congress guide that I would stop anybody who made a football joke talking, I will allow this motion. So thank you.
President, Congress, Nick Cusack, PFA, moving the motion. The PFA is unique in our movement in that we have 100% membership with every professional footballer being in the union. Our success in this regard is in no small measure to the all-encompassing collective bargaining agreement that we have in place. This agreement ensures that every player in the Premier League and EFL signs the same contract and benefits from the best terms and conditions anywhere in the world. We have also negotiated a standard players contract for the women's game, and we are very proud to have all the WSL players within our ranks. The solidarity amongst the players has enabled the PFA to protect them and ensure that the employers deal with us on a level playing field. Over the years, this has led to the influence of the union growing as restrictive regulations have been challenged and swept away. The abolition of the maximum wage, the reform of the retain and transfer system, and the changes following Bosman are good examples of the union making its mark, and we have built on these successes so that today we sit at the top table in football and are consulted on all aspects affecting players. The standard players contract is the cornerstone of our collective bargaining agreement, with an array of protections and regulations that are good for players, but also good for the game. The authorities recognise that in our industry, if every player had their own separate contracts and disputes were played out in the courts, This would be impossible to manage and cause huge disruption. The PFA has also used its strength to establish itself as a key stakeholder involved in all the major decisions on regulations and how professional football is run in England. This is reflected in the PFA's membership of the Professional Football Negotiating and Consultative Committee, the PFNCC, which meets regularly with all the other footballing bodies to deal with matters arising in our industry. This is a very important body, as it not only deals effectively with emerging issues, but it also operates like the United Nations, in that the union has a veto on any proposed changes that affect players. What this all adds up to is the kind of worker involvement and consultation that was once an integral part of industrial relations in Britain, and its demise has had a hugely detrimental impact on workers in a wide range of industries. The statistics speak for themselves. In 1979, 82% of workers had the benefit of collectively bargained terms and conditions, but sadly today only 20% have that privilege, against a Europe-wide average of 60%. For the remainder of workers, they are at the mercy of employers and the free-for-all in the labour market. This state of affairs has seen wages stagnate, pensions cut, terms and conditions slashed, and the proliferation of insecure working via zero-hours contracts and false self-employment. What we need to be declaring loud and clear from this conference is that it does not have to be this way. Football proves that it is not difficult to rubbish neoliberal arguments that collective bargaining and trade unions are bad for business. Indeed, the PFA has demonstrated that unions representing their workers responsibly and having the strength and solidarity to back that up are good for employers too. Of course, the PFA is helped by the fact that footballers' skills are very specific and employers cannot easily replace them, but nevertheless, other industries should take note that a vibrant and active trade union is not something to be feared, but should in fact be recognised as a positive and progressive presence in the workforce. That being said, it would be naive to expect all employers to embrace this approach. It has been all too apparent that the more the state has left businesses to their own devices, the more that workers have suffered. Therefore, we cannot accept the current situation that allows the market to dictate. When agreements cannot be reached between employers and employees, then there needs to be statutory intervention to bring about collective agreements that apply to all employers and workers in the industry. This kind of intervention will not presently be needed in industries like football, where agreements and mechanisms are in place and work well. But elsewhere, the sooner legislation is brought in to force through change, the better. In conclusion, everyone in this hall knows that the trade unions are a great force for good, and the battles we have fought over many years have transformed the lives of millions of working people. In recent years, the dramatic fall in collective bargaining has paved the way for so many advances to be put into reverse. As a movement, we must all work together to turn back this tide, because failure threatens everything we stand for. One of the greatest of football men and former PFA member Bill Shankly said that the socialism I believe in is everybody working for the same goal and everybody having a share in the rewards. That's how I see football, that's how I see life. These are wise words, and we would do well to remember them in our fight to get collective bargaining back where it belongs in every workplace in the land. We know that if we are successful, it will transform the lives of workers and their families and bring about the kind of fair and decent society we all crave. Please support the motion.
Thank you. GMB.
President Congress, Kevin Buchanan, GMB, seconding motion 73. The work of the PFA and indeed its sister organisation PFA Scotland should be recognised for the progress in their steps to establishing collective bargaining in an industry as challenging as professional football. However, Congress, we must also be mindful that there's a mountain of unseen tasks which contribute to the running of football clubs, which doesn't involve kicking a ball. In addition to the full-time backroom staff, there's an army of matchday staff without whom professional football would not take place. Stewards, programme sellers, catering staff, turnstile staff, just to mention a few, are essential to the running of clubs. And I'm sure there are many people in this hall today who support clubs the length and breadth of Britain. And with the start of the Champions League tonight, there'll be discussion in many pubs, I'm sure, about the billions that are spent in playing staff. Yet in England, only 2 clubs, Chelsea and Everton, have living wage accreditation. In Scotland, of the senior clubs, only Hearts have been accredited. All of us, both as trade unionists and football supporters, should be pressuring our clubs in whatever way we can to become living wage accredited as a minimum. We echo the call in the motion for statutory intervention to mitigate the worst excesses of bad employers. We should all remind ourselves regularly why this is essential. The daily stories of exploitation of staff are a sad but familiar story to us all as activists. Stories of blacklisting, low pay, 0 hours contracts, sexual harassment, unfair charges for uniforms, for spillages and breakages, long shifts without breaks, work cancelled without notice. The damage which results from these shameful individual stories isn't just financial. Last week, research from the Mental Health Foundation Scotland linked low pay, job insecurity and mental health problems with increased suicide risk. One of my colleagues in the Scottish TUC-backed Better Than Zero campaign put it very succinctly last week when they called on the Scottish Government to do everything in their power to encourage employers to allow trade union recognition in their workplaces by highlighting the benefits. For employers who continue to bully, harass, underpay and discriminate against their own workers, these companies should be named and shamed, should be stripped of any Investors in People awards, should be taken away tax incentives or any other measure which would hit them where it hurts in their pockets. A similar call to the UK Government should be made by this Congress to offer some prospect of protection to those suffering under unscrupulous employers. Congress, I second.
Thank you. I'm now going to motion 73 to the vote. All those in favour, please show. All those against? That's carried unanimously. I will now call motion 74 on apprentices. The General Council support the motion. It will be moved by Andrew Baker on behalf of the TUC Young Workers Conference, seconded by the GMB, and then PCS, Unite, the FBU and the NEU have indicated they wish to speak. Can all speakers please go to the front row and get your card swiped so we can take this debate in a timely fashion? Can I ask Andrew Baker to please come and talk on behalf of the Young Workers Committee? You're very welcome.
Hello. President, Congress, Andrew Baker, moving motion 74. You'll have to forgive me because I didn't know I'd be moving this motion until yesterday, so this was only written last night. When I was sitting there writing, I tried to think of the things that motivate me or inspire me about this topic, and there were a few things that immediately sprung to my mind. The President's moving address, an amazing address on Sunday, where so many of the eloquent points she made about the problems facing young workers had me nodding my head in recognition and agreement. And what are the four horsemen of the apocalypse we're faced with young workers? Low expectations, a lack of trust, a sense of futility, and an ignorance of their rights in the workplace. Now, apprenticeships offer an amazing opportunity for young workers to have a pathway to ethical and gainful employment and to address the record levels of youth unemployment we've had in this country. But instead, what have we seen? We've seen the apprentice national minimum wage of £3.50 enticing employers to use apprenticeships as the way to undercut pay and conditions and secure cheap labour. And we also seen another worrying trend is that apprenticeships are being offered to older workers to erode their pay and conditions, all under the guise of reskilling or retraining. And over 40% of all apprenticeships last year were offered to over 25s. And we need to be clear when we talk about this. This is not an opportunity to develop. This is not something that benefits the employee. This is slave wages. And there is another way, though, exemplified by Unison's apprenticeship charter, which calls on employers to give apprentices a job at the end of their apprenticeship, payment at the rate of the job, and access to high-quality training, and all of the other rights which they should be entitled to as employees. It also lays out standards for how an employer should consider and approach the administration of a scheme to ensure that they understand that they are investing in the future of their labour force, not undercutting it. Now, we know that the best apprentice schemes are those that are formulated and developed in conjunction with unions and meeting the standards that that charter sets out. And that's why I feel this motion is so important and shows the willingness of the TUC to address the issues facing young workers. Now, at the start of this, I spoke about the things that motivate me, and the other really big thing that sprung to my mind was the hope offered by Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party to young people and young workers that there is another way and there are hope and opportunities available. And we have the opportunity to recognise the engagement of young people. It might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to renew the trade union movement. Congress, I urge you to support this motion to help resolve the issues of young workers and also to secure the future of the trade union movement. I move.
And considering you wrote that last night, that was an excellent speech. Thank you very much. Can I now have GMB to second, please?
President, Congress, Craig Dawson speaking on behalf of GMB, seconding the TUC Young Workers Conference motion on apprenticeships. Congress, we live in an age when what was once a universally accepted truth is now in jeopardy. It was taken as a given that a young worker entering the world of work would be better off than those that went before. My generation are now poorer both in terms of wealth and income than our parents. To put it bluntly, it feels like the system's simply broken down. I can think of no greater shame than a generation held hostage by the inadequacies of our education system. The government would have us think that they are addressing this problem by promising to create 3 million young apprentices by 2020. But, to use a modern adage, you take a quick run through the wheat fields of government propaganda and you see the ugly truth. If you are a young hairdressing apprentice, the likelihood that you are paid below the already abysmal £3.50 apprentice minimum wage is not just growing, it is reaching crisis point. Coupled with appalling rates of advancement to advanced and higher levels, and you have the shameful face of slave wages in the United Kingdom today. Imagine for a moment, if you will, how one of the richest nations in human history can arrive at a point when the fundamental principle of a decent day's pay for a decent day's work becomes an alien concept, and you see mine and many other young workers' frustrations. Congress, the government have had 3 years and 2 reports funded by the taxpayer to begin to address this issue, and despite claims to the contrary, action is not forthcoming. Our challenge to the government is this: sort this mess out or we will. This motion is the start of this process. It commits the TUC to campaigning across all sectors against low-paid, insecure apprentice jobs, while commending those high-quality schemes that pay a decent rate and do lead to a proper job. It outlines a clear strategy which reiterates the central creed of my position as chair of the TUC Young Workers, that we are not simply the future, but we are the present. We are not a problem for tomorrow, we are the issue of the day. The plight of young apprentices is clear and it demands our attention. The challenge before us, Congress, is great, but I say this to you all: challenge accepted. Congress, I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you. PCS.
President, Congress, Sarah Broad from PCS, speaking in support of motion 74. I'm very proud to do so. I'm especially proud to speak on this motion as it originated from PCS and came through the Young Workers Conference to here. And I pay tribute to my comrade Laura, who wrote this original motion. It can be said that young workers are bearing the brunt of austerity with increased university fees, cost of living increases, casualisation of their labour and housing benefit cuts. This is disgraceful and this needs to change. Young people are our future. Apprentices are only adding to this hardship. These workers are being paid the minimum amount of work for the These workers are being paid the minimum amount for the maximum amount of work. Whilst preparing for this motion, I had a peruse of the available apprenticeships on the gov.uk website and found a number of opportunities with a salary of £3 an hour. I was shocked to hear that the minimum wage is £3.50 an hour as well. That's also pretty disgraceful. £3 an hour. I'm not even sure what you can get for that. Maybe some like Freddos. As a movement, we talk about a living wage. You definitely can't live on that. PCS is not opposed to apprenticeships per se, but we are opposed to low-paid exploitation of workers. In fact, it's expected that by 2020 there will be approximately 30,000 apprentices within the civil service. So we want the best for these workers as we would for any worker. Plus 30,000 new members of PCS will be pretty beneficial. PCS has already won a significant agreement with the Cabinet Office, including fair pay, job security and redundancy avoidance. Additionally, we have reassurance that no apprentices will replace redundant workers. Furthermore, we have the guarantee that we can speak to and hopefully recruit these apprentices at their inductions. This gives them an opportunity to join PCS, the biggest civil service union. It is vital that the TUC campaigns on apprenticeships and addresses the challenges of unfair pay and conditions. The union movement has a proud history of campaigning and winning, and I believe that this issue needs a robust and consolidated approach to ensure we win guarantees for these workers. Obviously, not all apprentices are young, but the majority are, and it's crucial that we organise them. PCS does have a proud organising tradition, particularly with the young workers, and I commend the Young Members Network and the work that they've done. This motion therefore instructs the TUC to campaign for permanent jobs and fair conditions for all, campaign against the casualisation of apprentices, produce TUC recruitment materials and coordinate a campaign across all sectors against low-paid, insecure positions. After all, young people definitely are the future. To win together, we need to campaign together. Please support the motion.
Thank you. Unite.
Here we go. Conference, comrades, Thomas Butler, National Young Members Delegate for the Unite Union. Thanks to the President for letting me speak. We just want to say a few words about apprenticeships and the young workers movement from the TUC and across the trade union movement in general. Conference, Unite has always been a supporter and one of our main proponents as a union and organising model is to organise young workers and by telling them that good apprenticeships are a good workplace model. They're a good way of developing people. They're a good way of establishing decent pay, decent skills, and establishing a good economy. So they are certainly mutually beneficial. What I would say, though, if it was constructively critical, is that we do this often. We're very, very concerned about organising young workers and establishing good apprenticeships across our labour economy. But I think the trade union movement in general needs to step up to the plate. We have an organising strategy for young workers and we try very, very hard to make sure our apprentices join as soon as they start work. But other unions need to step up to the plate as well. Other reps who are older need to realise it is a major concern for the labour movement that we stay modernise and so on. But also to the Labour Party. The Labour Party needs to realise not every young person is a student. They are apprentices. And as someone who wants to be a history teacher, I really, really want my kids, when I'm a teacher, to be working in places where we represent members in Nissan, in Vauxhalls, in BAE, in Toyota, in Rolls-Royce, where they do get good wages. They are mostly all in a union. They do have trade union recognition. But that should be the norm, comrades. We say this like it's some wonderful, wonderful thing, or that we're some oracle. We're not. It should be normal. This was normal 100 years ago, where we had collective bargaining, we had strength in the workplace. So, conference, Unite wants genuine industry recognised apprenticeships. They're an excellent investment for the UK industry and the UK economy. But also, we need to fight hard for those apprentices who are not in a recognised workplace, and we need to have political policy which plans industry and possibly takes it into public ownership. But conference, I've got 30 seconds left. So in summary, we need to set up our values. We need to display our socialism in caring for our young people, telling the employers that we will not tolerate exploitative apprenticeships where people get paid £2.50 an hour. We're only going to tolerate people where they get paid equality and justice at work. So Unite the Union is a big proponent of apprenticeships. They're mutually beneficial for all. Let's get into them workplaces, organise them apprentices, because it's a concern for the trade union movement, not just Unite. Let's do it, comrades.
Thank you, Thomas. Rousing speech. FBU.
President, Congress and the Noble Fire Brigade Union. I want to thank the TUC Young Workers Conference for bringing this motion on apprenticeships. The FBU supports the resolution because it reflects the experience that we've had with apprenticeships in the Fire and Rescue Service. Historically, we've long had what were called junior firefighters, although that number has dwindled over recent years. Their pay was determined by the collective bargaining through our National Joint Council, but other terms and conditions weren't. The FBU has always fought for junior firefighters to be offered whole-time, that is, full-time jobs in our industry on the completion of their training courses. Pre-employment apprenticeships have recently been established in our industry, but at the present time there aren't very many. Our experience of these schemes, however, is pretty mixed. Some have been relatively good, others much less so. The FBU has been clear that apprentices should be organised into trade unions and should have decent employment rights, including those on pay, hours and rest breaks. We're even more clear that apprenticeships should not be abused. They should not be used as a poor substitute for traditional recruitment into our industry. It should not be used to casualise our industry by undermining nationally agreed terms and conditions. There should be guaranteed jobs at the end of each and every apprenticeship scheme. Apprentices should be fully trained and have a reasonable expectation of a job in the Fire and Rescue Service when they've finished that apprenticeship. Recently, the FBU has become a provider of training for post-employment apprenticeships via our National Union Learning Centre. At the beginning of this year, 21 fire and rescue services in England were participating in the scheme, with over 400 people undertaking actual apprenticeships. Another 250 people have started apprenticeships this year, and it's intended to increase both the number of fire and rescue services and individual participants in the future. We want these young firefighters to benefit from the lessons our union has learned from almost a century of organising within the industry. We believe that union learning offers a valuable route for ensuring decent treatment of apprentices and their integration into the workforce. Support the motion, organise young workers in every apprenticeship in the UK.
Thank you. National Education Union.
President, Congress, Joe Lord, the National Education Union. I teach maths to apprentices, and this morning I'd like to highlight two further considerations to add to what we've already heard from previous speakers. Firstly, the appropriateness of the roles within apprenticeship entry. The government is currently considering apprentice teachers, a very dangerous prospect, as schools will use the scheme as a way to recoup the levy they've paid, as well as addressing the teacher shortage and the funding crisis by paying lower salaries. It's a triple win. Existing teachers are overworked and too often lack adequate support, so how will an apprentice teacher fare? Nursing is facing a similar concern. Apprenticeships must be of high quality, but they can't replace existing intense standard professional training. The government thinks apprenticeships are a way to address the staffing shortages in some sectors. They are not. It takes the focus away from more deserving high-quality apprenticeships. Secondly, there's the role of education providers in ensuring high-quality and appropriate apprenticeships. Due to the pernicious cuts in education funding, careers advice services in schools barely exist. Schools are encouraging students to follow familiar routes into further education, such as sixth form, rather than considering an apprenticeship. If sixth form doesn't work out in the first year, then an apprenticeship may be suggested as a consolation option. This is absolutely wrong. Employers, unions and education providers need to work together far more closely to raise the profile of quality apprenticeships as an appropriate and equal route for students and to campaign for those high-quality apprenticeships. A CBI study recently found 2/3 of employers are to reconfigure existing training routes into apprenticeships, meaning less levy funding for colleges. Apprentices must have sufficient paid time off the job to study in a college or a dedicated workplace training centre, but further education cuts are making this difficult. And taking training away from colleges has very damaging consequences. Learn Direct, which was in the news this morning for this, has been rated inadequate by Ofsted and has failed in its apprenticeship training. Yet they've received £600 million of public funding over the last 5 years. And to ensure no further disruption to students, their contract will carry on until at least next summer. We believe that further education providers should play a bigger role in the current apprenticeship programme, and the government should reverse the unacceptable cuts made to the further education sector as part of this. High-quality apprenticeships in suitable sectors with standard, recognised qualifications and ongoing careers advice and support will lead to a raised profile of apprenticeships. This will allow students, parents and teachers to make more informed choices of appropriate routes into work. Please support this motion.
Thank you. I'm now going to put motion 74 on apprentices to the vote. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. All those against? That is carried unanimously. Congress, we now move to a really important special feature, reaching out to young workers, a key area for our campaigning work. I'd like to invite Craig Dawson, General Counsel Lead on Young Workers, to introduce this work.
Sorry, Congress, it's me again. I'm here today to introduce this special feature on reaching out to young workers. And 2 Congresses ago, we made it a priority campaign of the TUC to come up with an organising strategy. And that's because Congress, this movement's getting older. We're out of sync with the workforce. I'm one of many, one of the unusual people who's under the age of 30 who's in a trade union. And while I've had good experiences, certainly in my own trade union, the GMB, which I've been a member of for about 10 years now, I think, I'm one of the exceptions to the rule. Where unions are present and active, the work that they do to recruit is essential. And it's true in the private sector as well that there's great work, and there's also great work in the public sector. And that's why campaigns like the recent Bakers Union strike, and like Unite Sports Direct action, and the GMB's work in Deliveroo and Hermes are so important, as well as in the public sector. They show unions doing what they do best, organising workers facing exploitation, and they give hope to thousands of other young workers that things can change. I've heard trade unionists say, well, getting young people into trade unions is just about getting trade unions talked about in schools, or it's just about getting trade unions on Twitter, or, of course, those things are important, yet we know they aren't enough. As if solving the problem is that simple, Congress. And something, Congress, we can get frustrated about, why young workers aren't joining our movement rather than thinking critically about what we offer is relevant and appealing to them. The presentation that we're about to play is about this problem and how we work to fix it, and I believe it can be fixed. Over this year, with the support of the President and a small working group of trade unions, we've run a huge research programme to find out what trade unions need to do in order to appeal to young workers. Some of it's quite surprising, and it's a wake-up call, and this is what we found.
Union members are getting older. Well, we're all getting older, but our whole movement is ageing. Look at this. If you break down union members into age groups, you can see where this is heading. 14% of the UK workforce is currently under 24, yet they only make up 4.7% of union members. We have much higher membership in the older groups, sure, but what happens as members now in their 50s start their well-deserved retirement? We just aren't bringing in enough younger members, not enough to fill the gap left by our retiring members. It gets even more worrying if you look at the backbone of our movement, our reps and activists. The union movement relies on tens of thousands of committed activists up and down the country. They organise their workplaces, represent members, and recruit new workers to the union. But the age profile of our reps is even older. We have some amazing younger activists, but far too few of them. Of course, some young workers do join unions, particularly if they are working in unionised professions or workplaces, but they are very much the minority. So why aren't younger people joining unions? It's certainly not because everything at work is going great for them. Over the last year, the TUC has listened to more than 100 young private sector workers tell us about work. Here's some of what they said.
The managers in my job are usually quite fair with everyone, unless you're not liked by them, and then they can be quite difficult and not help you out with things that you need to help him with or sorting.
If someone's a minute late to work, which I'm not, but if someone is a minute late to work, it's a whole form they have to fill out for another 25 minutes when they get there, sign it, understand it, and then there's a disciplinary if they have 3 of those within 3 months. Whereas when it comes to letting us out at the end of the day, they can keep us half an hour to an hour to an hour and a half over the time that's actually agreed on the rota.
What that tells us is that we need to do more to make trade unions make sense to them. There's no doubt that they need unions, but we found 3 key barriers stopping young workers organising together to improve things. Number 1, young workers might be unhappy about their work, but for too many, they don't expect any better. All too often we heard things like, "My boss lets me swap shifts sometimes, so I guess I can't complain too much when I have to stay late without pay." Union members know that things don't have to be that way, but too many young workers think there's no choice but to go along with it. Number 2, workers are isolated and disconnected from their colleagues. Insecure work and no time to build relationships with colleagues means there's little sense of trust. Young workers are worried that their colleagues will tell on them if they complain about the manager. Without trust, they can't tackle problems together. Number 3, young workers told us that whenever they have tried to change things alone, they've failed. That creates a strong sense of futility. Too many young workers just see the risk and the price tag of joining a union. They don't have any faith that things can change. The union movement's values have kept us strong for over a century. Times change, but our values remain. If we want to reach these young people, we'll have to change how we do things. That means the whole movement getting behind brilliant campaigns in workplaces where there are lots of younger workers, like at Ritzy Cinemas and Sports Direct. But we also need to think about trying new things to break down the barriers between younger workers and unions. We can't just keep saying the same things louder and expect them to work. We're looking for anything that works in getting younger workers on a path towards unions, so we're keeping an open mind. There isn't a magic fix. There's no one change that will solve all our problems and make everyone join up. We need to take younger workers on a journey. Sometimes that might mean doing things that don't immediately look like a union, but we'll need to do them first to get people thinking about the power they could have by working together. It's all part of a journey with trade unions as the destination. And we're going to be determined about this. We'll keep listening to young workers. We'll listen to their ideas, test, learn, modify, and test again. If we find things that work, we'll scale them up. If we find things that don't work, we'll chuck them out. Many of the tactics we'll need will be digital. That's how younger workers expect to interact with us and each other. We'll meet them where they are, looking for what gets people to click, online and with each other. By next Congress, we hope to have a clear strategy to make sure young workers can get the benefits of trade unions, and we're going to need your help. Once the pilot project's results are in, we'll need the whole movement to get on board. We're a movement of millions, but there are millions more who need a better deal at work for many years to come. Young workers need trade unions more than ever, and our movement needs young workers.
Thank you, Congress. If there's any research that the TUC has done that is more important than this, I don't know what it is. I went on a Young Workers Immersion Day organised by the TUC, got to Mile End Station, got my phone taken off me, my purse taken off me, an Oyster card, and I went around 3 typical workplaces where young workers were. By the end of the afternoon, after I'd spent time in a factory and in a call centre and in a restaurant, I was completely exhausted, and you really knew at first hand the insecurity and the desperate nature and the exploitation faced by many young workers. They are absolutely the future of our movement, and we absolutely have to connect with them, recruit them, organise them, and let them forge a better life for themselves, which many of them don't feel they have any prospect of at the moment. That's why I talked about this in my President's speech. I do commend the TUC's Young Workers project to unions and really ask them to get involved in it so that we can really turn the tide about young members and their density in unions. Thanks very much. Delegates, we may have time later this morning to take additional business. That additional business is Emergency Motion 1, the Royal Mail, moved by the CWU, seconded by Unite, and if possible, and if Congress is disciplined and organised, Emergency Motion 2, Birmingham refuse workers and upholding ACAS agreements, to be moved by Unite and seconded by PCS. I will advise Congress nearer the time. Will the unions moving and seconding the motions and the emergency motions please be ready? Delegates, we now turn to Section 4 of the General Council Report, Goods Services, the Civil Service. I call Composite Motion 12, a new settlement for the Civil Service. The General Council support the motion. It's moved by the FDA, seconded by PCS and supported by Prospect.
President, Congress, Gareth Hills, on behalf of the FDA, moving Motion 67, a new settlement for the civil service. Congress, just a few weeks after the general election, along with thousands of other civil servants, FDA members attended events held across the UK with a theme of celebrating a brilliant civil service. And here's what the Civil Service Live website had to say about that. A brilliant civil service helps to keep the United Kingdom prosperous and secure, supporting the governments we serve in implementing their commitments and delivering high-quality services for the public. United by our strong sense of public service, we continue to live by the enduring values: integrity, honesty, impartiality, and objectivity that run through all we do. To make the vision a reality, we will deliver improved outcomes for the country, from effective leaders leading skilled people in a great place to work. Congress, powerful and inspiring words, and a vision the FDA, and I'm sure everyone in this hall, can share. Because as we move through the post-Brexit landscape, Britain certainly needs a brilliant civil service more than ever. It's civil servants who've been tasked with preparing the Great Repeal Bill. It's civil servants who are at the heart of negotiating new trade relationships. It's civil servants who are expected to transpose EU laws into British ones and to overhaul immigration, customs, and agricultural policies currently handled by the EU. And Congress, as we know all too well, along with other comrades in the public sector, it's civil servants who've borne the brunt of austerity. Resources ravaged, close to a decade of pay restraint, cuts to pensions, and a raft of other conditions. The continuation of the 1% pay cap introduced in 2012, combined with those other changes to terms and conditions, means many civil servants have now experienced a real terms pay cut of 20%. And it's not just the FDA saying this. A recent National Audit Office report commented on departments being asked to take on more and more work as staff numbers fall, while austerity and pay restraint continue to chip away at the ability of departments to recruit and retain. Did you know that 1 in 4 senior recruitment competitions run by the Civil Service Commission in 2015-16 resulted in the post not being filled? Congress, that exacerbates excessive hours and further damages the health and well-being of civil servants. FDA members recently took part in our 2017 pay survey. The results, published in June, found that a third of civil servants say they would like to leave the service as soon as possible. Even more concerning is the view expressed by 86% of respondents that departments are not sufficiently resourced to meet the challenges of the year ahead. And members also highlighted problems in recruiting new staff and retaining those recruited, with a universal reason being dissatisfaction with pay. In calling the general election, the Prime Minister said, "This is a moment of enormous national significance." Congress, it was also a moment of enormous opportunity. An opportunity for the government to tread a different path from its predecessor, an opportunity to discard outdated spending plans drawn up in a pre-Brexit world, an opportunity to change past their sell-by-date approaches to workforce planning and pay, and to introduce fresh produce with renewed shelf lives. Right now, it feels like an opportunity lost. With nearly a third of our members considering leaving their posts as soon as possible, we urgently need a new settlement to ensure Britain has the strong and impartial civil service it needs to tackle the unprecedented challenges facing us in the years ahead. Lifting the pay cap would, of course, be a great start, but FDA also calls for more open dialogue about pay reform to give departments greater freedom to pay market rates for the skills our civil service needs. And, of course, the civil service must be properly resourced to deliver an exit from the EU that works for all industries and all sections of society. And that means we must be able to have grown-up conversations about pay without the 1% straitjacket. Congress, FDA agrees the public needs a brilliant civil service. The public needs a professional, talented and impartial civil service, one that is properly resourced and properly rewarded. Now that really would be brilliant. I move.
Thank you. PCS.
President Congress, Fran Heathcote, on behalf of PCS, to second Composite 12. The PCS amendment to this motion addresses the issues of resourcing the civil service. The EU referendum created huge economic and political uncertainty. Economically, the prospect of Brexit has led to increased instability over the last year, along with increased inflation at a time when growth and wages are already struggling. It's created uncertainty for PCS members, many of whose jobs are at the heart of changes to government structures and the implementation of Brexit. The scrapping, merging and forming of government departments by new Prime Minister Theresa May, as well as major policy changes, has affected members across the civil service. Our amendment calls on Congress to put pressure on the government to ensure full consultation with unions on any bodies that are established in relation to the EU referendum decision and its consequences. Following the referendum, PCS wrote to the head of the civil service, Jeremy Hayward, to say that all plans for cuts and closures should be halted in the wake of the result. We also requested information from the Cabinet Office on all functions in civil service and its related bodies, where there is interaction with the UK's EU membership and an urgent meeting at the highest level to discuss the implications. We did not receive a full response from government and have received no reassurance on the key points. We believe substantial extra resources should be made available for the work required in implementing Brexit. And we are also seeking assurances for members who are nationals of their other EU countries. This is why our amendment calls on Congress to campaign for the government to halt all planned staffing reductions, privatisation and changes to terms and conditions in the civil service and its related bodies, including planned cuts to redundancy pay. Post-Brexit changes to UK policies such as VAT, customs and excise and land border controls will potentially create a huge need for more training and staff at a time when cuts have been made on both fronts. Negotiations on exit terms are already underway, yet the minority Tory government has still to act to provide the civil service with the resource it needs to cope with the significant challenges that Brexit poses. As lower paid workers have borne the brunt, the proportion of senior staff has increased, leading to an increase in the official median wage not reflected in most people's pay packets as the 1% cap continues. After 7 years of Tory cuts, the civil service is nowhere near fully staffed. Congress PCS members are on the front line, whether in the border force, the HMRC and immigration, or at the heart of developing new laws, policies and trade relationships in government departments. But that work is understaffed and underprepared. While the UK engages in the long, complex process of withdrawal from the EU, there will be no let-up in the demand for existing services. Our public services are struggling to cope after years of swinging cuts and austerity, and this weakened Tory government must sit down with us to discuss the staffing and resources needed to ensure that the civil service is fully able to meet the demands placed upon it. Conference, please support this motion.
Thank you. Prospect.
President Congress, Mike Clancy speaking in support of Composite 12. We're all clear that the punishment of civil servants through the pay cap, resource deductions and workload increases has to end, and it has to end now. We have the statistics, we've been rehearsing them all week, drops in real income, survey evidence of wide recruitment difficulties and long hours culture impacting well-being. In fact, I often feel now that the civil service looks increasingly like a poorly run private company. Now, we anticipate the end of the pay cap, but that's only the start. The years of constraint aren't going to go away very easily. It's more than pay. It's about valuing the civil service, having a vision for its future and investing in its people. That's why Prospect has launched our vision for a contemporary and modern civil service. And this addresses the size and role of the state, pay, development, employment security, and most importantly, status. It's about reinvigorating the confidence among civil servants that their political leadership understands their contribution and the obligations they have to them. It's about a machinery for negotiation and consultation that actually works and reflects best practice in the rest of the public sector. I think there's a very, very limited time for the Cabinet Office to respond to current conditions and show it means to address our agenda. I fully suspect we will be underwhelmed by their response. Now, I add Prospect's voice to those who are prepared to take real action, born out of enthusiasm and engagement in workplaces. We've talked for a long time, and yes, probably the time for talking is coming to an end. But we shouldn't assume the support of civil servants, and we shouldn't assume the support of members. What we have to ensure is that we have members emotionally and numerically engaged in our campaign. I know as a negotiator, the employer pays attention when they know we have the numbers. These strike laws, these thresholds and these ballot laws are unreasonable and they are an offence to democracy. But they are the thresholds we have to meet. And if we meet them, they will listen to us. So Prospect's focus in not only asking for a renewed vigour and improvement in the lot of civil servants is to be clear that we may have to galvanise our members to take real action. There is a place for campaigning, there is a place for marching on the embankment, but there is a place for delivering in the workplace by invigorated representatives leading our members in the emotional and numerical belief that we can actually make the government change course, not just ask them to change course. Colleagues, please support the composite.
Thank you. I will now put Composite Motion 12, a new settlement for the civil service, to the vote. The General Council support the motion. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against? The motion is carried unanimously. Delegates, we stay with Section 4 of the General Council report, Goods Services Probation. I call Motion 68, Probation, Inspection and Professional Standards. The General Council support the motion. Moved by NAPO, seconded by the UCU.
Good morning, President Congress. Yvonne Pattison, National Co-Chair of NAPO, moving Motion 68, Probation, Inspection and Professional Standards. It may be a little unusual, but I'd like to start by saying something positive. And on behalf of our membership, I'd like to pay tribute to the Probation Inspector, Dame Glenys Stacey, who has continued to give an accurate but damning view of the services she has inspected, whilst laying no blame on the staff who are simply doing their best in a difficult set of circumstances. Her latest report highlights systemic failures in the managing of risk of harm, applying measures to help offenders move away from crime, and the inadequate delivery of court sentences. She goes on to say that despite the heroic efforts of staff, the service provided by the Aurelius Working Links enterprise in the South West and Wales was nowhere near the expected standard. This paints a pretty dire picture, but it is not dissimilar to previous inspections, with an earlier London-based report being one of the worst that we've seen. Let's face it, Congress, I'm sure that Theresa May and her government really don't like hearing that their big probation revolution is a complete failure, held up only by the staff group's dedication, commitment and professionalism. Yes, the same staff that were responsible for the former publicly owned gold standard service that they decimated under the watch of Secretary of State for Justice Chris Grayling, and whilst herself was the Home Secretary. Our members have been treated appallingly, and I'd like to put on record what a credit they are to the profession, working tirelessly in their resolve to reduce reoffending and thus protect each and every one of us from the risk of harm and victimisation. And yes, Mrs May, that includes the whole of your cabinet too. For those of you that may not know, the probation service was part privatised in 2014, with low and medium risk cases going to the private sector and the public sector retaining the high risk of harm. I do feel a bit like a broken record as I get up and say this every year, but I'm not going to apologise because I'm going to say it over and over again until somebody somewhere listens to us. Would it surprise Congress to know that in many of the privately owned companies there is little evidence of offence-focused work, with examples of some of the lower risk cases being serviced by telephone contact, if at all, and numerous failures to engage not being properly enforced and returned to court? Now, the probation service has always been a service based on professional standards with a required level of training, qualifications and expertise necessary to engage with this difficult group, many of whom have deeply entrenched patterns of behaviour and also have justifications for doing what they do. Now, since the inception of the Transforming Rehabilitation Revolution, we've hemorrhaged numerous staff down to early retirement, long-term sick, mass redundancies or alternative careers. And those that have been replaced by younger, less qualified, less experienced staff. Now, I'm not knocking them. There is a place for those staff in our organisation, but they do need to be placed in established teams, properly supported, and not just left to their own device with little or no help. Workloads across both sectors are critically high, leaving no time for reflection. And to be fair, as professionals, we don't always get it right first time, and despite some employers' views, one size does not fit all. Our client groups are individuals with complex needs who need to be properly assessed, resulting in an individual and tailored approach to their rehabilitative journey. Sadly, there is little time for this in our profession these days, and I feel we're on a fast and slippery slope, which is becoming increasingly difficult to turn around. I'd like to mention the judiciary briefly. The case is clear. They have lost all confidence in the probation service. They need to know when they pass a sentence that that's what's going to be delivered, and that X, Y and Z doesn't become A, B and C, or even D and E. This has resulted in many people going to custody that could otherwise have been managed successfully in the community. It makes me really angry that it appears the offending population are viewed as second-class citizens and do not matter. Where is it written that they should not be treated properly with respect by professionals who can do their best for them? So, the introduction of a licence to practice, similar to other parallel professions, will ensure that continued professional development for staff will benefit them, our service users and the public we are there to protect. Congress, I move.
Thank you. UCU.
President, Congress, Rob Goodfellow, UCU, seconding motion 68. So why is UCU, an education union, seconding this motion? Well, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, especially when it comes to inside of a prison. Prison educators are our members. Whatever happens in prison has an effect on those educators. They are professionals who understand what they do and why they do it. Do we really want the probation service members to be any different? Many of them aren't called probation officers anymore. But guess what? They're called caseworkers, 70% of which are now in the private sector. What does that tell you about where things are going? Education and professional standards are critical to maintain safety in that sector. This is, of course, all about saving money. But ironically, it's much more expensive to have reoffending rather than rehabilitation. Probation or education on the cheap is false saving and is dangerous. Even Gove said education in prison is important. Who should we to argue with him? Prisoners who don't take part in education are 3 times more likely to be reconvicted than those that do. 46% of people entering prison have literacy skills no higher than expected of an 11-year-old. Deprofessionalising probation officers isn't just wrong, it's expensive. Please support. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to put motion 68, probation inspection and professional standards, to the vote. Will all those in favour please show? All those against? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Right, now we move on. So, Congress, as I indicated earlier, I may be in a position today to take Emergency Motion 1 and Emergency Motion 2 after today's scheduled business. I intend to try to take them both after Emergency Motion 1, Royal Mail, moved by CWU and seconded by Unite, after Motion 70, if time allows, and Emergency Motion 2, Birmingham Refuse Collectors and upholding ACAS agreements, moved by Unite and seconded by PCS. Will both those unions and all those seconders please be ready? Now I call paragraph 4.6 and motion 69, the probation crisis. The General Council support the motion, moved by NAPO and seconded by Unison.
Ian Lawrence on behalf of NAPO, moving motion 69 and welcoming Unison's amendments. Chair, Congress, the probation service is broken, and as Yvonne has said, we know why. We also know what is not working, such as the collapse of through-the-gate services for short-term offenders, the flagship of Grayling's ill-considered reforms, now identified by probation inspectors as a spectacular failure which could be wound up tomorrow with nobody noticing, through the gate to nowhere. Inadequate and bordering on non-existent supervision of clients, especially domestic violence perpetrators, with huge cuts in the provision of support programs, evidential linkage to a staggering 26% rise in serious further offences across England and Wales, including a number of murders, with more recent cases currently under investigation. Yes, Congress, this is what a so-called safe system looks like. And let's not forget the impact on victims of such awful crimes, where support for bereaved families is often just not up to the required standard. Massive and unmanageable caseloads faced by our members across both arms of the service because, let's not kid ourselves, the state-run MPS isn't problem-free. Staff shortages and a litany of administrative problems over pay and pensions, and as you'll hear more about shortly from Unison, the outsourcing of night supervision in approved premises. The privateers haven't brought much by way of innovation, but have given us unsafe operating models, job cuts averaging 40% across the sector, shambolic community payback in some areas where sessions don't happen because too many clients turn up or not enough, and as we heard earlier this year in the Working Links empire, because the vans used to transport clients and supervisors to their assignments hadn't actually been insured for several weeks. Working Links, the subject of that damning report from inspectors last week. Working Links, who, by the way, boast about their successful education contracts in places such as Saudi Arabia, but can't run a whelk stall in England and Wales. Why, even a colony of rats that I'm told occupied one of their decaying buildings last year left pretty sharpish when they realised who actually owned it. A kind of rodents' revolt against privatisation. So to all failing providers such as these, I say this. Our members care about their profession and stand ready to help you mend the chaos you've created. But if you won't engage and won't listen, if you can't show your staff the respect and dignity they deserve, then for goodness sake, go. Do everyone and yourselves a huge favour, hand in the keys and go, and let's have probation return to professionals who know what they're doing. Congress, you well know the history of how it has come to all this. But insult has been added to injury as we learn that failing providers have had more, yes, more taxpayers' cash thrown at them. A recent £22 million bailout, including a waiver of service penalties, known as a reconfiguration of the contracts. Worse still comes news that a further £277 million reconfiguration has been signed off by ministers over the remaining 4-year life of the contracts, supposedly to provide reassurance to the market. Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's a bung for the magic money tree. It's a huge promissory note in reward of abject failure. And it, along with this whole privatisation, this disgraceful privatisation, must be called in for parliamentary and public scrutiny. Congress, the probation service, an institution over 100 years in the making, is broken, and we ask who will fix it. We're not Chris Grayling, the architect of this disaster, aided and abetted by spineless advisors and a gutless Lib Dem partner in that dreadful coalition. You remember that, don't you? Well, what we need is a Labour government pledged to restoring the service back to where it belongs, and that's full public ownership and control. So while government ministers prevaricate and fail to publish their own review into this mess, what is desperately needed at this juncture is local accountability, so that we know how much these contracts are worth, so we know what the kickback is for shareholders, so we know the truth about commercial transactions funded by the taxpayer but conducted in secret. So NAPO's plan is to try and resolve these fundamental anomalies, and that's to press for city mayors, the London mayor and police and crime commissioners to be given oversight of these contracts and bring some much needed transparency. And we seek support from Francis and the General Counsel to engage with these people to help us ramp up the pressure on failing privateers, to supplement the parliamentary campaign that NAPO and Unison have been running and which is gaining increasing political traction. And finally, to every union represented here today, we need your help in publicising what's happening in probation amongst your members. Your members who form part of our communities, whose public safety is being jeopardised, your families, your children's safety, put at risk of harm because of the quest for profit and the failure of this inept government to take appropriate action. Congress, I move.
Thank you. Unison.
President, Congress, Mark Trask, Unison, second in motion 69. Unison welcomes this motion from NAPO, our sister union in the service. Probation is an essential service which helps reform the lives of those who have broken the law and to protect the victims in our communities. Together, Unison and NAPO have been campaigning against the disastrous privatization of probation since the Conservative Justice Secretary Chris Grayling initiated it in 2014. He split the service down the middle, sold off half of it to the unscrupulous private sector. Private companies now own the 21 community rehabilitation companies, which are contracted to provide probation across England and Wales, and now they simply aren't providing probation. This is not the fault of the staff, who are working heroically to maintain services against all the odds. It's clearly the fault of the Ministry of Justice and their botched privatization, and the fault of profiteering private companies. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation is independent of government, and over the last 12 months, it's published a damning series of reports into the failings of the probation companies. The independent evidence is clear. Probation is broken. Unison, NAPO, and others have given evidence to the Parliamentary Justice Committee about the service failings, and we hope that the Justice Committee will follow through and announce a full parliamentary inquiry into the disaster that is unfolding in probation. Because otherwise, the Ministry of Justice will just carry on, because it cannot and will not acknowledge that Chris Grayling's back-of-a-fag-pack reforms have failed. Instead of holding private companies to account for their failings, at the end of July, the new Justice Secretary gave them a massive bailout of more taxpayers' money because they were complaining that they were not making enough money out of the contracts. This shows the Ministry of Justice is not fit to manage the contracts of the 21 probation companies. It has centralized control of what used to be a local, democratically accountable service and tried to run a command and control regime like it does with the prison service. And you can see how a similar approach has worked in prisons. Rise in violence, drugs, gangs, making our prisons less safe and less effective at rehabilitating prisoners. Congress, the amendment to this motion simply asks that private probation companies which continue to fail should have their contracts terminated and the service brought back under public ownership and control. The amendment also asks for Congress to support our call for the latest reckless probation privatization experiment to be called off, namely the proposal to outsource supervision of National Probation Service's 110 probation hostels. These hostels are based in our communities and house some of the most dangerous service users when they leave prison. It's beggars belief that the Ministry of Justice would try to follow its disastrous privatization program by privatizing yet more of the service. But that is exactly what's proposed. Please support the motion and the amendment.
Thank you. I'm now going to put motion 69 on the probation crisis to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against? That's carried unanimously. I now call motion 70 on social security. The General Council support the motion, moved by PCS and seconded by Equity.
Thanks, Chair Congress Janice Godrich, PCS, to move motion 70 on social security. Congress, PCS is pleased to move this motion, as well as being the union that represents workers in the DWP. We've been privileged to work alongside other unions and organisations in defence of social security, working, for example, with colleagues from Unite Community, DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts, and the Unemployed Workers Combine, exposing the impact of sanctions and against job centre closures. However, it's clear that there is an urgent need for a debate in the labour movement around social security that focuses on developing an alternative vision to the decimated, punitive and piecemeal system that survives after decades of political attacks and government cuts. We do represent experts in the field and as such are well placed to start a discussion on social security that goes beyond our recent work exposing individual government policies and looks to develop a real alternative. We've campaigned for an end to sanctions and extra conditionality, an increase in benefit levels to restore dignity to those on out-of-work benefits, and more universalism within the social security system. We've campaigned against job centre closures, which provide a lifeline for unemployed people, and the closures are forcing them to travel further, which undermines the support to get people back into work. The government consultation was a sham, and the DWP has failed to publish the equality analysis it carries out for each site closure. Against sanctions, the number of sanctions imposed on people claiming job seekers allowance or UC rose to 33,000 in December. In the 6 months to March, the most recent month for data available, the number of sanctions had risen by 50%. They rocked under the coalition and peaked at about 90,000 in October 13. Sanctions are frequently imposed on people for trivial reasons, such as being late for routine job centre meetings, and are a key driver of food bank usage. Universal credit, the government's flagship policy, has been a disaster. It was led by the Tories' political choice to cut public spending and to vilify people who rely on social security for support. We're clear the rollout should be suspended, cuts to DWP staff and resources reversed, to give the department the means to develop a system that offers genuine help. Colleagues, the concept of a universal basic income to replace social security is increasingly being advocated as a method of ensuring the economic benefits of a rich country are distributed to all in society. It's been referred to as a citizen's income, a social wage or a basic income guarantee. It is a regular, universal payment to everyone as an individual right without means test or the obligation to work or perform other services in return, and high enough to ensure an existence in dignity and participation in society. The structure and design varies a great deal, with some versions providing what amounts to the equivalent of the current state pension and others the equivalent of a full-time living wage. In its most radical and complete form, it represents a net transfer of wealth and reduces inequality. And there are a range of options and different approaches. The current debate, though, has tended to overlook key issues, such as the dignity of work and in particular the role of trade unions, and it's vital the movement is part of this growing debate. It's important to recognise that it can be used to turn against the most vulnerable in society. The version of UBI trailed in Finland demonstrates how the concept can be manipulated by the right to undermine social security, as well as how it can be misapplied. So there's a need for us to lead that debate and come to our conclusion on it. Colleagues, let's have clarity on this issue and what's at stake. For decades now, we all know we've seen a systematic ideological, legislative and political attack on the welfare state. One of the twin powers of our organisations, our society, are the NHS and the social security system. And it's no accident the assault on the NHS has been ramped up. And this is in part because the Tories believe their assault on the social security system has been, from their point of view, a real success. They thought they could get away with it. It's an issue for our whole movement. If universal credit is ever implemented, between 5 to 7 million people in work will be eligible. So the strategy is not just about trashing the social security system, but the institutionalisation of low pay. It's therefore no longer enough to say we must defend this social security system. We have to defend the very concept of social security, a basic human right as a citizen to live a life free of poverty, want hunger, and with access to real jobs and decent pay. Conference, I move.
Thank you. Equity. And EIS can speak as well.
Congress, President, David John, Equity. I'm seconding the motion and speaking in support of our amendment. Universal credit. It was introduced in 2010 by the coalition government. Now, one of the architects of it, David Freud, stated in September 2012, "We are going to make sure there is parity between the self-employed and employed." However, despite extensive lobbying, universal credit in its current form clearly does prejudice the self-employed, and we are a very long way from parity. Much of this is because of the effect of the minimum income floor, or MIF. Under the MIF, claimants who are deemed to be gainfully self-employed are treated as having a notional income, whether or not they are actually earning it. At the current rate, this amounts to £12,570 per year. This is assumed irrespective of what you are actually earning. Now, this penalises workers like those in the entertainment industry who have variable income from month to month and sometimes week to week. Here's an example. Jenny lives on her own. She rents a one-bed flat for £670 per month in outer London. She's professionally trained. She's been working as an actress for the last 15 years. Now, last year, she earned 30 grand, which is a great year. Although this year, her earnings are much lower, and this month, she doesn't expect to earn anything. DWP say she is gainfully self-employed, so they apply the minimum income floor. This means her award is £257 for this month. If she were an employee, there would be no MIF, and her universal credit award would be £917 because it would be based on her actual income. So the difference in this award is a staggering £659.92. Now, the government expect to save £1.5 billion by applying the MIF. Much of this will be because self-employed people, self-employed workers, will have their benefits artificially reduced. Now, the Work and Pensions Committee in May this year stated, "The incoming government should commission an independent review of the MIF with a view to improving its sensitivity to the realities of self-employment. Until this is complete, the MIF should not apply to self-employed universal credit claimants." Congress, the MIF is causing the self-employed real harm in this country. This independent review should happen soon, and we need to call for the MIF to be abolished. It's harming our workforce and is increasing in-work poverty levels. Please support the motion and the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. EIS.
Thank you, President. Congress. Nicola Fisher, EIS. In supporting this motion today, I'd like to focus on one particular cut, that being the child cap and its vicious companion, the so-called rape clause, which will form part of the child element of universal credit. And I'd like to ask you to think of child 3, the child that's going to be affected by this. We all know or have known or perhaps have been a child 3, a child full of joy and hope and promise, full of wonder and dreams, but now the child that the Tory government considers is less worthy and less deserving. Imagine for a moment being that child, the child who is a greater burden on their family, a child whose accident of birth will mean that their family may be worse off by £60 a week. In our family, when we were growing up in the 80s, we had a child 3, a child 4 and a child 5, so we would really have been on the naughty step. And I still see the impact of growing up in poverty on my siblings. We have 2 child 3s in our family, one who's saved from this by being a twin, but one who is not. He's the youngest child of one of my sisters. A wee fella with a loving heart and a lively mind, and who's sharp as a tack, but who is considered less deserving by accident of birth. The DWP describes this and describes the rape clause as the most effective, most compassionate way of taking this benefit forward, and it would be laughable if it were not so despicable. And I'd like to talk about the rape clause for a moment. How in a so-called civilized society have we come to this? How can we be asking women to prove they have been raped in order to be able to afford to feed their children? And the fact that this has been signed off by a third-party organisation, say the Tories, means that it's okay, nothing to see, don't worry about it, move on. Part of that form asks women to aver that they are no longer living with the biological parent of their child. And this ignores the realities of domestic abuse. It ignores the fact that rape occurs within as well as out with relationships. And the idea that having been raped, you should then go along and ask a third party to fill out that form for you is quite frankly horrifying. In Scotland, the leader of the Tory party, Ruth Davidson, we are suffering with her just now, but we believe she has ambitions to appear in a prime ministerial office near you. She's a real charmer. She said all women have got to do is tick a box, so that's okay. Let's not worry about it. And what about Northern Ireland, where failure to disclose a crime may mean a prison term? What of the women living there? All these cuts, comrades, feed into the idea, the Victorian idea of the deserving and the undeserving poor. And the rape clause, the child cap, are certainly an attempt at social engineering. It says that only those with money are allowed to have free choice over the size of their families. And it talks about entitlement and not need. So for child 3, for child 3's mother, and for everyone affected by these cuts, please support.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Congress, I'm now going to put motion 70 on social security to the vote. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. All those against? The motion is carried unanimously. Congress, as I mentioned earlier, we are now in a position to take emergency motions. I call Emergency Motion 1, the Royal Mail. The General Council support the emergency motion, moved by the CWU and seconded by Unite.
Thank you, Conference. Terry Pullinger, extremely proud to move this motion on behalf of postal workers across this country and, of course, the public that we serve. Dave Prentice said yesterday that our time has come again, and I absolutely agree with him. But, Conference, we need to grasp that time. Action inspires. And there is more and more workers in this country now starting to take industrial action to defend themselves. And it's important that every one of us, all our trade unions, as publicly as we possibly can, and with respect to the leadership of the TUC, as publicly as we can, support all of those actions. So solidarity to our colleagues in the RMT, solidarity to the Birmingham refuge workers, solidarity to anyone taking action, and especially solidarity to those incredibly brave young workers in McDonald's making their stand against that organisation. But you're about to be joined by 110,000 postal workers that are now being balloted in this country to take industrial action in defence of our jobs and this much-loved public service. This dispute is about honour. Our members have got it in abundance. Royal Mail haven't got any. The leadership of Royal Mail, the same leadership that were there when it was privatised, made the case for privatisation. We opposed it. You joined us. You supported us in that. The people in this country did not want the Royal Mail privatised, yet they sold it off cheaply to move it on quickly on the promise that privatisation would bring this utopia to the organisation, the service, and to our members. They said it had been starved of investment in the public sector. And now it won't be a political football anymore. There'll be new money to invest in new products and services, to protect the great USO, and to ensure that our members' standard of living, job security and retirement security would be protected. Well, here we are, 3 years on, just over. They've had all the hanging fruit in the business. They've been selling off our buildings, flogging the assets. Now they're turning their sights to maintain their profits and feed the shareholders who've had increased returns year on year. We're getting close now to £1 billion has gone to shareholders since Royal Mail was flogged off. But in order to keep up that momentum, they're now turning their sights on our members and on this service, great public service. They're attacking our terms and conditions, and they're attacking our security at work. And every one of us have been debating all week how one of the most important things for workers is to have job security, standard of living security and retirement security. It's what we've got to fight for, and it's what we will be fighting for in Royal Mail. They also have shown their hand, and they want to bring in a two-tier workforce in Royal Mail. The next generation, they want them to be paid less, worse terms and conditions and more insecure employment models. Our union has made a decision. We will not pull up the ladder on the next generation. Generations of postal workers fought for the conditions we've enjoyed. Generations before us of trade unionists fought for the conditions and the security that our members have enjoyed. No employer gives you these things. Unions fought for it. And we now have got to do our bit to fight for the next generation. As I say, that's a key part of our dispute. Our members deserve security at work. They serve this country well and have done for hundreds of years. They deserve a decent standard of living. They deserve a pay rise, which is currently not being offered. They deserve security and dignity in retirement. And yesterday, I think it was, Francis, you said we've got to start reinventing things. Well, we need to start rethinking and reinventing pensions, because the only pension that gives you dignity in retirement is a wage in retirement, not cash out at the point of retirement, not lump sums that get spent. That theory is now, we've seen the evidence, it is failing people, and people are going to have poverty in retirement. There's legislation sitting there. It's already been cleared. It's waiting to be pushed through. And the TUC can help us push that legislation in. Let us come up with new pensions models. We're fighting for that as part of this dispute so that we can give people dignity in retirement. Let me say this to you. Our members, I know them, they've got far too much dignity, self-respect and pride not to stand up for themselves. They will fight for themselves and to protect this public service. And we want your support. We're asking them to pick sides. Pick your union or forever accept less. We're asking you to pick sides as well. Support us. We'll be asking the public to support us. Go on our social media. Show the postal workers that you're 100% behind them. And I promise you, we will ensure there is still a public service worthy of renationalisation when Labour come into government. I move.
Unite.
President, Congress, Kev Terry, seconding the emergency motion on the Royal Mail on behalf of Unite. Offering solidarity to our CW colleagues across the Royal Mail Group and our support on the ground. We are continuing our intentions to do all we can with our own members to join you in taking industrial action. Royal Mail has repeatedly attacked its workforce, pay, terms, conditions and future pensions as a continuing race to the bottom since privatisation. Unite members share the concerns of the CWU members, not just on the theft of the pensions, but on the need for a secure future for the Royal Mail Group, including its return to public ownership and control as the People's Post Office. That future cannot be built on weak foundations of privatisation, deregulation, and ever more insecure contracting and employment models. I see the impact of policies in action. I work as a driver, previously for one agency and now another, contracted to Royal Mail. Congress. All of us support the fight against privatisation and will continue to support the campaign to defend our members' pensions and our Royal Mail and Post Office. returning to public ownership under a Labour government already proudly committed to do it. Congress, please support this motion.
Thank you. Congress, I call emergency motion 1 on the Royal Mail. Will those in favour please show? Thank you. Those against? Congress, that emergency motion is carried unanimously. I now call on emergency motion 2, Birmingham refuse collectors and upholding ACAS agreements, moved by Unite and seconded by PCS.
Congress, Howard Beckett, Unite, moving the emergency resolution to protect the sanctity of ACAS deals. Congress, we have a Labour Council in Birmingham, a Labour Council keen to do the job of Tories. Birmingham City Council has a history of mismanagement, sins of the Tories, but the present-day sins are those of a Labour Council. There are 3 people, comrades, on a bin wagon. One is a driver, grade 4, and 2 loaders, one a 2 and one a grade 3. The grade 3 has safety-critical responsibilities at the back of the bin, the eyes and ears of the driver. This council, a Labour council, has passed proposals that will see the grade 3 go to a grade 2. Safety will move recklessly to the responsibility of the driver. Comrades, this will see our members go from £19,000 a year to £15,000. Members who have been subject to a public pay cap for 7 years now being asked to lose up to £5,000 to justify austerity brought in by a Labour council. This matter, Congress, was resolved at ACAS on the 15th of August, when it was agreed that safety would remain with the loader and consequently they would not lose money. Yet on the 31st of August, Labour reneged on that deal and issued our members, 113 of them, with redundancy notices for the 1st of October. Congress, this austerity has been driven by Stella Manzi, a chief executive appointed cross-party, and make no doubt about it, a Tory. A chief executive who earns £180,000 a year. A chief executive who in 1 year took home £160,000 in claimed expenses on top of her salary. A chief executive who goes home at night and takes satisfaction on working out on working people and tells stories of working people losing £5,000 a year. Be in no doubt, Congress, these cuts are the thin end of the wedge, intended to bring cuts in across Birmingham City Council. And our members, Congress, deserve better. For those of you who are at the National Shopsures Network, you will have heard of our convener, Richard, telling stories of members crushed at the back of bin wagons, of a member who waited 4 years to be upgraded to a grade 3, only 2 weeks later to receive this redundancy notice, of a member who's already put his house up for sale, knowing he cannot afford his mortgage. But Congress, Richard, our convener, has his own story. A man who 4 years ago held his wife in his arms as she died of a massive heart attack. His daughter was 9. She's now 13 and stands on the picket line with Richard and his comrades. Richard, Congress, has Labour to his very core. He is standing strong, protecting members who simply cannot afford to lose the wages the council ask of them. His core, Congress, is not shared by those Labour councillors. Councillors who talk of hard decisions in language that has no place in a socialist party. Those councillors should feel physically sick at the proposal to remove thousands from our members. And let's be honest, Congress, a council, Labour Council, who do not stand up for our members has no place in our movement. If they sound Tory, if they talk Tory, if they act Tory, then let us call them Tories. And I say clearly to those councillors, if you continue to act as a Tory in this region, then Unite will treat you like you are Tories. Congress, my union is in court this week to make the Council enforce the ACAS deal. My members are being balloted as we speak to continue industrial action. Congress, I have no doubt that that ballot will be overwhelmingly in favour of continuing industrial action. Because Congress, my members had something in here. I've seen them, I've stood with them on the picket line, and they have something that the likes of Stella Manzi can never understand. They're part of our movement. They take confidence from our successes of the past, and they know that this success will give confidence to disputes of the future. But conference, I will finish by saying to those councillors who will vote on whether to implement the ACAS deal, the resignation of John Clancy is not enough. You're a collective. Remember what it was that brought you to Labour. Find something inside of you that my reps have. Be proud of wanting to give a legacy that says that you stand on the side of workers. Reject the ideology of austerity. Reject the likes of Stella Manzi. Uphold the ACAS deal. Conference, I move.
President Congress, Mark Sawatka, on behalf of PCS, to proudly second the emergency motion to support our refuge workers, members of Unite, striking in Birmingham. And Congress, this resolution and the fantastic speech that Howard just made tells us the real story of austerity. Because we shouldn't forget that the workers now being subjected to further pay cuts and job cuts already suffered cuts in 2011 when there were already job cuts made by the council. All of those workers have had pay restraint because of the public sector pay cap going back to 2010. And what we now see, in a further frenzy of austerity affecting workers and the public they serve, a further 120 jobs at risk and pay cuts for workers, many of whom have worked for decades in dedicated public service, of up to £5,000. And let's call something out, conference. When people tell us they're making pay cuts because of equal pay, we should tell them that stinks. We didn't fight in this movement for equal pay for it to mean levelling down pay levels. Equal pay should mean levelling up pay levels, and nobody should take pay cuts in the guise of equal pay. And this is a council that has issued redundancy notices, that has threatened this workforce and now threatens their income. And the stand being taken by these workers is brave, it is principled. And alongside those are McDonald's and St Bart's and PCS members on strike for weeks to keep a job centre open in Sheffield indicates that our members have had enough of the injustice of austerity. So we should carry this resolution. We should tell the council their actions are unacceptable. We should tell them that John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, supported the bin workers at the rally on Sunday, and they should listen to their leadership and not force their cuts onto working people. And we should say that our movement will stand up against cuts and for workers, whoever makes those cuts, because they cannot be justified. And while we're at it, Congress, let me also say this. That when you go to ACAS and reach a deal, it is right this motion calls for that deal to be honoured. But let's also remember in ACAS, where PCS members work, we have seen massive cuts imposed by ACAS on their own workers, closing an office in Bootle, downgrading work, making workers redundant, and closing 11 helplines down to 4. It's hard working in ACAS, and for those listening, we should support the bin workers, but you should stop cutting jobs in ACAS and put resources in to help our members with industrial relations disputes around this country. So Congress, our resolution here from Unite, we should be proud to support. We should send a clear message on Sunday where there's a demonstration by mobilising all our union members in Birmingham and wider to go and support the refuge workers. Because you know what? I'll finish with this. There's a lot of talk about public services and who deserves and who doesn't deserve, and we're going to get an announcement at lunchtime that they may breach the pay cap for prison workers and police officers. But we said yesterday a pay rise for all. And bin workers resemble those public sector workers that everyone takes for granted. They notice when they're not there, when our streets are not clean. They do a vital job. We should respect and honour them. We should support this motion, support the demonstration, call on the council to do the right thing. Victory to the bin workers. I second the resolution.
Congress, I put emergency motion 2, Birmingham refuse collectors and upholding aircraft agreements to the vote. Will all those in favour please show? Thank you. All those against? Thank you. That motion is carried unanimously. Congress, that concludes this morning's business. Can I remind delegates that there are various meetings taking place this lunchtime. Details of these meetings can be found on page 13 to 16 of the Congress Guide. I would also like to remind delegates to complete and return the Equality Monitoring Survey that was sent to delegates by email before Congress. You still have time to return the survey and also have opportunity to enter the data on a tablet at the TUC information stand situated in the exhibition area. Congress, the hall will now be closed till 1:30. Please make sure you take everything you need when you leave. You won't be able to access the hall before 1:30, but please be back promptly for this afternoon's session. I declare this morning's Congress closed.